The transport van rolled to a stop outside Naval Training Center Coronado. Just as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon, Commander Elena Vasquez stepped out into the salt-thick air. Her civilian clothes, faded jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and worn running shoes drawing no attention from the personnel moving across the sprawling facility. She carried a single duffel bag over her shoulder, the kind you could buy at any surplus store for $30. Nothing about her suggested she was anything other than another contractor, maybe a consultant brought in for some administrative review. She was 5'6", lean but not imposing, with dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail. Her face carried the kind of unremarkable features that made people's eyes slide past her in a crowd. Exactly what she'd cultivated over 15 years of service in places where being noticed meant being dead. The guard at the entry checkpoint barely glanced at her ID before waving her through. His eyes had already moved to the next vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows that looked far more important than a woman in a hoodie. Elena made her way across the compound, her steps quiet and economical. She moved like someone conserving energy for a long journey, not wasting motion on unnecessary flourishes. But anyone trained to observe human movement would have noticed the way she scanned exits, measured distances, and kept her weight balanced over the balls of her feet even while walking casually. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The assignment was straightforward on paper. Conduct a week-long undercover assessment of training protocols, instructor effectiveness, and group dynamics among SEAL candidates in their final phase of basic underwater demolition. SEAL training. Command wanted an insider perspective, someone who could observe without the artificial behavior that appeared whenever brass showed up for inspections. Elena was the logical choice. She'd completed BUD/S herself 8 years ago, served 3 combat deployments with SEAL Team 7, and earned her commission through a combination of field performance and tactical brilliance that had impressed even the most skeptical officers. She'd also spent the last 18 months in a training and evaluation role, which made her intimately familiar with what worked and what didn't in producing quality operators. The challenge was maintaining cover while surrounded by men who were being trained to notice everything. She'd been inserted into the facility's administrative records as Elena Vasquez, DoD Civilian Contractor Training Assessment Division. Her legend was solid but thin. She was supposedly here to evaluate equipment maintenance protocols and facility resource allocation. Boring enough that no one would ask too many questions. Important enough that she'd have access to training areas and personnel. The base housing coordinator had assigned her to a small efficiency apartment in the civilian quarters, away from the candidate barracks. Elena dropped her duffel on the narrow bed and stood at the window, looking out across the training compound. In the distance, she could see candidates running in formation, their boots striking pavement in unified rhythm, their voices carried across the space between buildings. Cadence calls that had been shouted by warriors for generations. She'd stood in those formations once, run those same routes until her lungs burned and her legs turned to concrete. She remembered the pain, the doubt, the moments when quitting seemed like the only rational choice. And she remembered the instructors who'd pushed her past those moments, who'd refused to let her settle for anything less than excellence. Now she was here to evaluate whether the current generation of instructors maintained those same standards. Elena unpacked efficiently, hanging her civilian clothes in the small closet and placing a laptop and several notebooks on the desk. Her actual equipment, the gear that revealed her true purpose, remained hidden in specialized compartments in her duffel. Encrypted communication devices, recording equipment, and credentials that would end her cover the moment anyone saw them. The mission briefing had been clear. Observe, document, report. Do not intervene unless absolutely necessary. Do not reveal your identity unless the situation becomes untenable. And above all, do not let personal feelings about your own BUD/S experience color your assessment of current protocols. That last instruction was going to be the hardest to follow. Elena changed into workout clothes, black compression pants, and a navy blue tank top that revealed arms carrying the lean, defined muscle of someone who lived in the gym. She pulled her hair back tighter and laced up her running shoes. The candidates would be finishing their afternoon training session soon. And she wanted to observe the transition period when exhaustion lowered guards and true personalities emerged. She made her way to the compound's main fitness facility, a massive building that housed weight rooms, cardiovascular equipment, and specialized training areas. The place smelled like sweat, rubber, and the peculiar metallic scent that came from thousands of hours of human effort absorbed into concrete and steel. A handful of candidates were already there, getting in extra work after their official training day. Elena recognized the type immediately: the ones who refused to be satisfied with meeting minimum standards, who measured themselves against impossible benchmarks and kept pushing until their bodies failed. She selected a treadmill near the back wall, positioning herself where she could observe without being obviously intrusive. As she started running, settling into an easy 9-minute mile pace, her eyes tracked the movements of the men around her. 3 candidates worked together on a rowing machine circuit, their technique solid but unrefined. They were encouraging each other, voices low and supportive. Good team dynamics, she noted mentally. The kind of mutual support that would matter when things got hard. Another candidate worked alone on a pull-up bar, his form degrading as fatigue set in. He pushed through anyway, grinding out repetitions that looked more like convulsions than controlled movements. Determination without wisdom, Elena thought. The kind that led to injuries that could end a career before it started. She increased her pace gradually, letting her breathing deepen but stay controlled. The rhythm of running had always helped her think, the repetitive motion freeing her mind to process and analyze. The candidates began filtering out as evening approached, heading toward the chow hall for dinner. Elena maintained her pace for another 20 minutes, then cooled down and headed to the showers. She'd eat later. After the main rush, contractors didn't share tables with candidates anyway. As she walked across the compound in the fading light, she passed a group of 12 candidates moving together in a loose formation. They were laughing about something. The kind of easy camaraderie that came from shared suffering and common purpose. One of them, a tall Hispanic man with shoulders like a linebacker, noticed her and offered a polite nod. Elena returned it with a slight smile. The kind strangers exchange in passing. None of them looked twice at the small woman in workout clothes. Why would they? She was just another contractor, another face in the administrative machinery that kept the base running. They had no idea they'd just passed someone who could outrun, outfight, and outthink every single one of them. And that was exactly how it needed to stay. The chow hall at 1,900 hours was organized chaos. Candidates moved through the serving line with mechanical efficiency, their trays loaded with the high-calorie fuel their bodies demanded. The noise level was substantial but controlled conversations happening at multiple tables. The clatter of utensils on plates. The occasional bark of laughter quickly suppressed when an instructor walked past. Elena entered through the side door, reserved for civilian personnel and contractors. The candidates section was clearly demarcated from the instructor and staff areas, an invisible line maintained by tradition and protocol. She collected her meal: grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables, and water, and found a small table near the windows, away from the main flow of traffic. From this position, she could observe without being observed. Her years of intelligence work had trained her to become functionally invisible in public spaces, to project an aura of not interesting that made people's attention slide past her. The 12 candidates she'd passed earlier entered together, their group cohesion immediately apparent. They moved as a unit, claimed a large table near the center of the hall, and settled in with the comfortable confidence of men who'd established their place in the hierarchy. Elena ate slowly, her ears tuned to the conversations around her. Training talk dominated: who'd crushed the morning's timed swim, who'd struggled with the navigation exercise, speculation about tomorrow's surf torture session, the usual concerns of candidates deep in the crucible of Bud's. The group of 12 was louder than most, their voices carrying across the space with the kind of volume that came from men comfortable with being heard. Not aggressive, exactly, but dominant. They occupied their territory with the assurance of people who'd claimed it through performance and personality. Their apparent leader was the man who'd nodded to her earlier. His name tape read Morrison, and he spoke with the slight drawl of someone from the Southwest. He was recounting a story about today's obstacle course run, his hands gesturing dramatically as he described someone else's spectacular failure on the rope climb. "I'm telling you, Rodriguez went up that rope like a drunk spider," Morrison said, grinning. "Arms and legs everywhere, no technique, pure panic." The table erupted in laughter. Elena noted that Rodriguez wasn't present, whether by choice or exclusion. She couldn't tell yet. A smaller candidate at the end of the table, named Tape Reading Chen, chimed in. "At least he finished. Thompson quit halfway up and just hung there like a Christmas ornament until the instructor told him to get down." More laughter, though this round carried a sharper edge, the kind that separated laughing with from laughing at. Elena continued eating, her expression neutral, but her analytical mind was categorizing what she observed. Group cohesion built on shared experience. Positive. Internal hierarchy clearly established. Neutral. Depending on how it was maintained. Mockery of absent peers. Potentially concerning. Worth monitoring. A new candidate entered the chow hall, moving with the cautious body language of someone navigating unfamiliar social territory. He was young, maybe 21, with the kind of fresh-faced appearance that made him look like he should be pledging a fraternity, not enduring one of the world's most demanding military training programs. His name tape identified him as Parker. Elena watched as Parker collected his meal and scanned the room for a seat. His eyes moved past several empty chairs near smaller groups, clearly hoping to find a spot where he might integrate with the more established candidates. Morrison noticed him too. His expression shifted subtly, not overtly hostile, but with the predatory interest of someone who'd identified a potential target for entertainment. "Hey, Parker," Morrison called out, his voice friendly enough that Parker's face lit up with relief. "Over here, man. We've got room." Parker navigated through the tables, his tray balanced carefully, his eagerness to be included written clearly across his features. He slid into the empty seat at the end of the 12-man table, nodding grateful acknowledgement. "Thanks," Parker said, still figuring out the social geography around here. "No problem," Morrison replied easily. "We look out for our classmates. That's what teamwork's about, right?" The others murmured agreement, their expressions welcoming. Elena felt a small warning pulse in her gut, the kind of instinct that came from watching predators circle prey in environments far more dangerous than a chow hall. "So, Parker," Chen said, leaning forward with apparent interest. "How'd you find today's training?" "That navigation exercise was pretty brutal." Parker launched into an earnest description of his experience, clearly eager to bond with the group. He talked about getting turned around in the course, losing time on a calculation error, barely finishing within the acceptable window. The 12 listened attentively, occasionally nodding or offering sympathetic comments. To a casual observer, it looked like genuine camaraderie. Elena saw something different, the patient attention of people waiting for the right moment to spring a trap. Morrison let Parker finish his story, then leaned back with a thoughtful expression. "Yeah. Navigation can be tough. You know what helps? Actually studying the course materials instead of just hoping you'll figure it out in the moment." The comment landed with surgical precision, friendly in tone, devastating in implication. Parker's face flushed slightly. "I did study," he protested. Hey, no judgment." Another candidate, named Tape Williams, interjected smoothly. "We all learn at different paces. Some of us are just naturally better at the tactical stuff." Elena set down her fork, her appetite diminishing as she watched the dynamic unfold. This was subtle hazing, the kind that left no bruises and violated no explicit regulations. Just a group of established candidates, slowly, methodically, cutting down a newcomer's confidence under the guise of helpful advice. "The thing is," Morrison continued, his voice carrying to nearby tables now, "Bud, isn't really about individual performance. It's about the team, and when one person struggles, it affects everybody." Parker's shoulders hunched slightly. "I know. I'm working on it." "Sure you are," Chen agreed, "but working on it and actually performing are different things." Out there in the real world, you don't get points for effort. You either execute the mission or people die. The words were harsh, but technically accurate, the kind of truth that could be wielded like a weapon in the right hands. Elena's jaw tightened. She recognized this pattern from her own Bud's experience. There'd always been groups who built their cohesion by identifying outsiders to target. Sometimes the instructors shut it down. Sometimes they let it play out, believing that candidates needed to learn to handle social pressure as well as physical challenges. Parker pushed his tray away, his meal barely touched. I should probably get some extra study time in tonight. Good idea, Morrison said, nodding approvingly. Can't afford to be the weak link, right? As Parker stood to leave, one of the other candidates named Tape Davidson added a final observation. Hey Parker. No offense, but you might want to hit the gym too. That obstacle course run today. You were struggling on some of the strength sections. Parker's face went from flushed to pale. He nodded once, grabbed his tray, and left quickly. The 12 watched him go, then returned to their conversation as if nothing significant had happened. Elena forced herself to continue eating, to maintain her cover as a disinterested contractor, but her mind was cataloging everything she'd witnessed, building a profile of group dynamics that would go into her report. Morrison's group represented a challenge for any training program. They were clearly competent performers. You didn't make it this far into BUD's without serious capability, but they were using that competence to establish a hierarchy that excluded and diminished others. Left unchecked, that kind of culture could poison an entire team. She made a mental note to observe how the instructors handled this group. Whether they recognized the toxic dynamic brewing or whether they were too focused on physical performance metrics to notice the social dimension. As Elena finished her meal, Morrison's attention suddenly shifted in her direction. His eyes landed on her with the kind of casual assessment men often gave women in male-dominated spaces, not overtly threatening, but evaluating, categorizing, dismissing. Hey, he called out, loud enough to carry across the intervening tables. You're new around here, right? Elena looked up, her expression politely neutral. Arrived today. Contractor? Morrison asked, already confident he knew the answer. Assessment and evaluation, Elena confirmed, keeping her response minimal. What exactly are you assessing? Chen asked, his tone suggesting he found the concept vaguely amusing. Whether we're using the right brand of floor cleaner. The table laughed. Elena recognized the dynamic, a group of men bonding by collectively viewing her as something less serious than themselves. Training protocols and resource allocation. She replied evenly. Making sure taxpayer money is being spent effectively. Ah, bureaucracy, Morrison said, nodding as if this confirmed his assumptions. Important work, I'm sure. The dismissal in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. She was administrative overhead, part of the machine that created paperwork and slowed down real warriors doing real work. Elena offered a small, professional smile and returned her attention to her meal. The message was clear. This conversation wasn't interesting enough to pursue. But Morrison wasn't quite finished. You know, it's interesting. We're out here every day, pushing our bodies to the absolute limit, preparing to defend the country in the most dangerous environments imaginable. And then there's people who assess things. Williams laughed. Man, leave the lady alone. She's just doing her job. I'm not criticizing, Morrison said, his hands raised in mock defense. Just observing the contrast. Different kinds of service, right? Elena stood, collecting her tray. As she passed Morrison's table on her way to the dish return, she allowed herself one brief moment of direct eye contact. You're right, she said quietly. Different kinds of service. Her tone was neutral, her words agreement. But something in her eyes, a flash of steel that came and went in an instant, made Morrison's smile falter slightly. Elena deposited her tray and left the chow hall without looking back. Behind her, Morrison's table returned to their conversation. The brief encounter, already forgotten. But Elena hadn't forgotten. She'd catalogued every face at that table, every name tape, every subtle gesture of dominance and dismissal. They'd shown her exactly who they were in those few minutes of interaction. Tomorrow, she'd begin showing them what real assessment looked like. The following morning arrived with the brutal efficiency that characterized every day at Bud's. Elena was awake at 0430, 30 minutes before the candidate's reveal. She dressed in the same unremarkable workout clothes from yesterday and made her way to the training compound's observation deck, a raised platform that overlooked the main physical training area. A handful of instructors were already present, reviewing the day's schedule and preparing equipment. Elena positioned herself at the far end of the deck, her clipboard and pen giving her the appearance of someone taking bureaucratic notes about facility conditions. The candidates began emerging at 0500, moving in small groups toward the grinder, the large asphalt pad where morning physical training typically started. Morrison's group of 12 arrived together, their unity intact even in the pre-dawn darkness. The lead instructor, a grizzled senior chief named Kowalski, stood at the center of the grinder with his arms crossed. Elena had read his file yesterday evening. 22 years in naval special warfare. Multiple combat deployments. A reputation for being demanding but fair. Gentlemen, Kowalski's voice carried across the space without effort. Today we're mixing things up. Instead of the usual PT routine, we're running a modified version of the combat conditioning course. Partner teams. Random assignment. Groans rippled through the assembled candidates. Random partner assignment meant you couldn't rely on your preferred teammates, you had to work with whoever the instructors paired you with. Kowalski began calling out names, creating pairs that seemed designed to break up established groups and force candidates to work with people outside their comfort zones. Elena noted the deliberate strategy. Good instructors understood that real teams didn't get to choose their members based on friendship. When he got to Morrison's group, Kowalski split them systematically. Morrison was paired with a quiet candidate from another class section. Chen got matched with someone who'd been struggling in recent evaluations. The 12-man unit became 6 pairs scattered across the broader candidate population. Morrison's expression tightened with displeasure, but he said nothing. Challenging an instructor's decision was a fast track to extra attention of the unwanted variety. The combat conditioning course combined distance running with obstacle elements and tactical problem-solving stations. Partners had to stay together, complete each station as a team, and cross the finish line within the qualifying time window. Elena watched the first few teams launch into the course, her trained eye evaluating their performance. Some pairs found immediate synergy, communicating efficiently and dividing tasks according to their respective strengths. Others struggled to coordinate, their individual capabilities undermined by poor teamwork. Morrison and his partner, a smaller candidate named Hernandez, started strong. Morrison clearly had the physical advantage, but Hernandez demonstrated good technique and steady endurance. They moved through the early obstacles efficiently, their time competitive with the leading pairs. Then, they hit the rope bridge station. The obstacle required both partners to cross a rope bridge while carrying a 60-pound sandbag between them. The design forced communication and coordination. If one person moved too fast or too slow, both would lose balance and fall into the water below. Elena watched Morrison take command immediately, his voice carrying across the distance. "I'll take point. You follow my pace. Just hold your end steady and match my movements." Hernandez nodded agreement, and they started across. For the first few feet, Morrison's plan worked. Then Hernandez's foot slipped slightly on the wet rope, causing a small wobble. "Keep it steady," Morrison snapped, his tone sharp with frustration. "I'm trying," Hernandez replied, his concentration visible in his expression. "Trying isn't good enough. Either do it or don't." The exchange caused both men to lose focus. Their coordination deteriorated, the sandbag swinging awkwardly between them. Within seconds, both candidates plunged into the cold water below, their time on the station reset to 0. They had to climb out, retrieve the sandbag, and start over. Elena noted the way Morrison's jaw clenched with anger, the way he refused to make eye contact with his partner during the second attempt. Their second crossing was successful but slow, their time cushion from the earlier obstacles completely consumed. Elena made a note on her clipboard. Morrison. Strong individual. Performer. struggles with adaptive leadership when paired with less experienced partners, reverts to blame rather than coaching under pressure. The pattern repeated throughout the morning. Whenever Morrison's partner made a mistake or showed weakness, Morrison's frustration became visible. He was an excellent individual operator, but his teamwork skills degraded rapidly when things didn't go according to his expectations. By contrast, some of the quieter candidates, ones who didn't dominate the social space in the chow hall, demonstrated exceptional partner support. They coached struggling teammates through difficult sections, adjusted their pace to match their partner's capabilities, and found creative solutions to coordination challenges. As the morning session concluded, candidates sprawled across the grinder in various states of exhaustion. Kowalski walked among them, his voice carrying observations about performance, teamwork, and the difference between individual excellence and team success. Some of you crushed this course because you got lucky with a strong partner, Kowalski said. Some of you struggled because your partner wasn't at your level. But the ones who succeeded today were the ones who made their partners better, who adapted their approach to maximize the team's capabilities rather than just showcasing their own. Morrison stared at the ground, his expression unreadable. Elena descended from the observation deck and made her way toward the administrative building where she'd established her contractor workspace. As she walked across the compound, she passed a cluster of instructors discussing the morning's training. "Morrison's got a problem," one of them was saying. "All the physical tools in the world, but he can't work with anyone who doesn't meet his standards. He'll either figure it out or wash out," another instructor replied. "We've seen his type before. Usually takes a serious failure to break through their ego." Elena kept walking, her expression neutral, but her mind was processing the instructor's assessment. They'd identified the problem. The question was whether they had a plan to address it or whether they were just going to let natural consequences play out. She reached her small office, really just a converted storage room with a desk and computer, and began transcribing her morning observations into her encrypted assessment report. The work was mechanical, allowing her mind to wander while her fingers typed. The door opened without warning. Morrison stood in the doorway, still in his wet training gear, his expression somewhere between embarrassed and defiant. "Ma'am," he said, the title carrying just enough respect to be technically proper. "I saw you taking notes during training. Is there something specific you're evaluating about the course design?" Elena looked up from her computer, her face professionally neutral. "Just documenting how resources are being utilized. Standard assessment protocol." Morrison stepped further into the small office, his presence filling the space in a way that might have been intimidating to someone less experienced. "It's just, I noticed you were watching pretty closely when Hernandez and I were working the rope bridge station. I was observing all the pairs." Elena replied evenly. "That's what assessment means." "Right, but..." Morrison hesitated, clearly trying to find a way to ask if his performance was being specifically scrutinized without sounding paranoid. "I just want to make sure any context gets included in whatever report you're writing. Hernandez is a good guy, but he's still learning some of the technical skills." Elena sat back in her chair, studying Morrison with the kind of calm attention that made him slightly uncomfortable. "Are you concerned that your performance this morning didn't meet your own standards?" The question was delivered without judgment, but it landed with precision. Morrison's face flushed slightly. "I know I could have handled that better," he admitted. "But when you're under time pressure, and your partner isn't pulling their weight..." "Their weight?" Elena interrupted gently. "According to the performance metrics, Hernandez carried his exact share of the load. 60 pounds split between two people. What he struggled with was coordination, which requires communication and patience from both partners." Morrison blinked, surprised that this contractor was quoting specific performance metrics and offering tactical analysis. "You seem pretty familiar with the training protocols for someone doing resource assessment," he said, his tone shifting toward suspicious. Elena shrugged. "I read the course documentation. It's part of understanding whether resources are being allocated effectively. Can't assess training equipment usage without understanding what the training actually involves." It was a reasonable explanation, delivered with the kind of bureaucratic logic that most people found boring enough to accept without further question. But Morrison was still studying her, with an expression that suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied. "You prior service?" he asked bluntly. Elena met his eyes steadily. "I've worked in defense contracting for several years." "You pick up familiarity with military operations." It wasn't a lie, exactly. Just truth presented from a very specific angle. Morrison nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he was filing this interaction away for future consideration. "Well, thanks for whatever you're doing here. I should get cleaned up before the afternoon session." He left, and Elena returned to her report. But she knew she'd just moved one step closer to the edge of her cover. Morrison was smarter than she'd initially credited. He was asking the right questions, noticing the small inconsistencies that didn't quite fit the simple contractor narrative. She'd need to be more careful. Or, she'd need to be prepared to accelerate timeline on her assessment. The afternoon brought classroom instruction on tactical planning and mission preparation. Elena observed from the back of the room, ostensibly evaluating the facility's educational resources and teaching methods. In reality, she was studying how candidates processed complex information under pressure. The instructor presented a scenario: a hostage rescue operation with multiple variables and incomplete information. Candidates were divided into small groups and tasked with developing operational plans. Morrison's group, reunited for the classroom session, attacked the problem with aggressive confidence. They made quick decisions, assigned roles efficiently, and presented a plan that was bold and action-oriented. But when the instructor began probing their assumptions and asking about contingencies, the plan's weaknesses became apparent. They'd optimized for speed and aggression, while giving minimal consideration to what could go wrong. A quieter group across the room had developed a more methodical plan. It was slower and more cautious, but it included multiple contingencies and demonstrated deeper consideration of the various risks and variables. "Both approaches have merit," the instructor concluded. "But in the real world, you don't get to choose when things go wrong. The teams that survive are the ones that planned for failure, not just success." Morrison's expression suggested he disagreed with the assessment, but he remained silent. Elena made another note: tendency toward overconfidence in planning. Group reinforces aggressive approach without sufficient critical analysis. Potential vulnerability in complex operations, requiring adaptive response. As the classroom session ended, Elena slipped out before the candidates and made her way to the base gym. She'd maintained her cover for a full day, gathering substantial observations. Now she needed to work out the tension that came from constantly restraining her natural responses. The gym was nearly empty during this mid-afternoon window. Elena claimed a section of floor space and began a workout routine that would have impressed any strength and conditioning coach. A combination of calisthenics, core work, and explosive movements that revealed years of professional athletic development. She was 45 minutes into the session, her shirt soaked with sweat and her muscles burning pleasantly, when she noticed someone watching from the weight area. Chen, from Morrison's group, was seated on a bench press, but his attention was fixed on Elena rather than his workout. His expression was puzzled, almost analytical. Elena continued her routine without acknowledging his attention, moving through a series of burpees into pull-ups with the kind of fluid efficiency that came from thousands of repetitions. Chen approached after a few minutes, his curiosity apparently overcoming his social caution. "That's some serious conditioning work for a contractor," he observed. Elena grabbed her water bottle and took a long drink before responding. "Sitting at a desk all day isn't healthy. Got to balance it somehow." "Yeah, but..." Chen gestured toward the pull-up bar where Elena had just completed a set of 20 strict pull-ups without visible strain. "That's not staying in shape. That's serious athletic training." Elena shrugged. "I like to challenge myself. Gives me something to focus on outside of work." Chen nodded, but his eyes carried the same analytical quality she'd seen in Morrison earlier. "You compete in anything? CrossFit, endurance racing, that kind of thing?" "Just personal fitness goals," Elena replied, not really into the competitive scene. It was another deflection, Technically true, but designed to shut down the line of inquiry. Chen seemed to recognize it as such. "Well, whatever you're doing, it's working," he said. "Most contractors I've seen around here can barely make it up a flight of stairs without getting winded." He returned to his weights, but Elena could feel his attention continuing to track her periodically throughout the remainder of her workout. Two members of Morrison's group had now noticed inconsistencies in her cover story. The questions were still tentative, easily deflected. But the pattern was forming. She finished her workout and headed to the showers, her mind calculating timelines and risk factors. She could probably maintain the simple contractor cover for another 2 or 3 days. After that, the accumulating observations and questions would reach a tipping point where maintaining the fiction would require increasingly elaborate explanations. Better to plan for the reveal now, to control the timing and context rather than being forced into it by circumstances. That evening, Elena sat in her apartment reviewing the day's observations and drafting her preliminary assessment. The data was already compelling. She'd identified several areas where training protocols could be improved, where instructor intervention could address developing problems before they became serious. But she'd also identified something more concerning: a subculture among certain candidates that valued individual performance and aggressive dominance over genuine teamwork and adaptive leadership. Morrison's group wasn't unique in that regard, but they were the most visible example. Left unchecked, that subculture would produce operators who excelled in straightforward missions but struggled when confronting complex situations requiring flexibility and collaborative problem-solving. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her handler at Naval Special Warfare Command. Day 1 assessment complete. Continue observation. Report any situations requiring early termination of cover. Elena typed a brief response. Cover holding but showing stress. Estimate 3 to 4 days maximum before controlled reveal becomes necessary. No situations requiring immediate termination. She sent the message and returned to her report, documenting everything she'd observed in meticulous detail. Somewhere in this data was the information that would help the next generation of SEAL candidates become more effective operators. But first, she needed to survive the next few days without completely blowing her cover. Outside her window, the base settled into its evening routine. Candidates studied in their barracks. Instructors reviewed the day's performance metrics, and the machinery of naval special warfare continued its relentless work of transforming ordinary men into extraordinary warriors. Elena closed her laptop and stood at the window, looking out across the darkened compound. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new observations, new opportunities for her cover to slip. She was confident in her ability to maintain the deception, but a small voice in the back of her mind, the same instinct that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments, whispered that confidence, reality didn't always align. Something was building. She could feel it in the way Morrison and Chen had looked at her, in the questions they'd asked, in the subtle suspicions forming behind their eyes. The reveal would come soon. The only question was whether she'd control the timing, or whether circumstances would force her hand. The second day began with deceptive calm. Elena arrived at the observation deck at 0445, her clipboard ready, her contractor persona firmly in place. The morning air carried the sharp bite of ocean wind, and the sky was just beginning to lighten along the eastern horizon. Senior Chief Kowalski was already present, along with 2 other instructors Elena recognized from yesterday. They were setting up equipment for what looked like a water confidence evolution, various stations designed to test candidates' composure and problem-solving abilities while submerged. "Morning, ma'am," Kowalski said, nodding briefly in her direction. "You're here early." "Trying to get a complete picture of the training cycle," Elena replied. "Hard to assess resource allocation if I'm only seeing part of the operation." Kowalski grunted approval. "Most contractors show up around 9. Take some photos, check a few boxes, and disappear by lunch. Respect the dedication." The comment was genuine, which meant Elena's cover was still holding with the instructors. They saw her as unusually thorough, but still fundamentally administrative, someone doing their job well without being particularly interesting. The candidates began arriving in pairs and small groups, moving with the resigned determination of people facing another day of controlled suffering. Morrison's group of 12 came together as always, their unity apparently unshaken by yesterday's forced partner separations. Kowalski outlined the morning's evolution: underwater knot tying, breath hold exercises, and simulated equipment failures that candidates would need to troubleshoot while submerged. The kind of training that separated those with genuine water confidence from those who were just good swimmers. Elena watched the candidates file toward the pool facility, noting body language and group dynamics. Morrison moved with his usual confidence, but Chen kept glancing in her direction, assessing looks that suggested he was still processing yesterday's gym encounter. The pool evolution proceeded smoothly for the first 90 minutes. Candidates rotated through stations, some excelling and others struggling, but everyone performing within acceptable parameters. Elena took notes on equipment usage, instructor-to-candidate ratios, and safety protocol adherence. Then the alarm sounded. It wasn't the regular training whistle or the controlled signal that indicated a planned evolution change. It was the base-wide emergency klaxon, 3 sharp blasts that sent every person on the compound into immediate alert status. Kowalski's radio crackled to life. All personnel, this is base security. We have an active security situation at the main armory. Unknown number of intruders, possible weapons involved. All training evolutions are suspended. Candidates return to barracks immediately. Instructors report to your department heads for possible mobilization. The announcement hit like a physical wave. Candidates froze mid-exercise, looking to their instructors for guidance. The instructors' expressions shifted from training mode to operational mode, the difference between teaching warfare and preparing to conduct it. You heard the order, Kowalski barked. Pool secure, gear stowed, move to barracks in formation. Now, candidates began hauling themselves out of the water, moving with practiced efficiency despite the obvious confusion and concern on their faces. An active security threat on a training base was rare, but not unprecedented. The question in everyone's mind was whether this was a drill or genuine emergency. Elena's mind shifted into a different gear entirely. Her contractor cover required her to follow civilian evacuation procedures, report to the administrative building, await further instructions, stay out of the way. But every instinct she'd developed over 15 years of service was screaming at her to move toward the threat, to assess the situation, to prepare for action. She forced herself to remain still on the observation deck, watching the organized chaos unfold below. Candidates formed up in hasty ranks. Instructors conducted rapid head counts. Equipment was secured with speed that sacrificed neatness for efficiency. Morrison's group moved together toward the barracks, but Elena noticed Morrison himself had stopped at the edge of the pool deck, his head turned toward the distant armory building. His posture suggested someone calculating distances and response times, not someone preparing to take shelter. Chen grabbed Morrison's shoulder. "Come on, man. Orders are to get to the barracks." Morrison shrugged him off. "Something's not right about this." "Doesn't matter. We follow orders." "You follow orders," Morrison replied. "I'm going to see what's actually happening." Before Chen could respond, Morrison broke from the group and started moving at a fast jog toward the armory complex. 2 other members of his group, Williams and Davidson, exchanged glances and then followed him. Elena watched this development with growing concern. Candidates breaking from ordered movement during a security situation was a serious breach of protocol. It also meant there were now 3 unauthorized personnel potentially moving into a dangerous area. Kowalski spotted the breakaway immediately. "Morrison, Williams, Davidson, get back in formation." But the 3 were already too far away, either not hearing the order or choosing to ignore it. Kowalski swore creatively and grabbed his radio. "Base security, this is Senior Chief Kowalski, BUD/S Training Command. I have 3 candidates who broke from ordered movement and are heading toward the armory complex. Names are Morrison, Williams, and Davidson. They are not authorized responders and should be detained if encountered." The radio crackled back. "Copy that, Senior Chief. We're tracking multiple unauthorized movements. Situation at the armory is still unclear. Recommend all non-essential personnel maintain distance. Elena made a decision. Her cover required her to evacuate with other contractors. Her actual mission required her to observe and document training protocols and candidate behavior. And her conscience, the part of her that had kept teammates alive through 3 deployments, required her to ensure those 3 idiots didn't get themselves killed by walking into an active security situation. She descended from the observation deck and moved quickly toward the administrative building, following the proper contractor evacuation route. But once inside, instead of proceeding to the designated shelter area, she ducked into a storage room and pulled out her phone. The device had multiple functions beyond civilian communication. One of them was a direct encrypted link to the Base Security Operations Center. She activated it now, her credentials automatically identifying her to the security personnel monitoring the situation. A gruff voice answered immediately. "Commander Vasquez, this is Security Chief Patterson. Wasn't expecting to hear from you. Thought you were running undercover assessment." "I am," Elena replied quietly. "But 3 candidates just broke protocol and are heading toward the armory. I need a situation update so I know whether to maintain cover or intervene." Patterson's tone shifted to professional briefing mode. "Situation is still developing. We got an automated alarm from the armory indicating unauthorized access. Response team is moving to investigate, but we're treating it as potentially hostile until confirmed otherwise. Could be a sophisticated intrusion. Could be a faulty sensor. Could be anything in between." "The candidates moving toward the area, are they in immediate danger?" "Shouldn't be, if they maintain distance. But if they try to enter the armory or interfere with the security response, yeah, they could complicate things significantly. We've got people with weapons drawn clearing the building." Elena processed this rapidly. Morrison and his friends were likely motivated by some combination of curiosity, bravado, and genuine desire to help. But unauthorized personnel near an active security response created dangerous confusion. Security teams needed to identify threats quickly, and unknown individuals approaching from unexpected directions got classified as potential hostiles. "I'm moving to intercept the candidates," Elena said. "Maintain my cover if possible. But I'm not letting them walk into a friendly fire situation." "Copy that, Commander. I'll notify the response teams that you're in the area. Your credentials are flagged in the system, so if anyone scans you, they'll know who you are. But the candidates don't have that protection." Elena ended the call and moved back into the hallway. The administrative building was emptying rapidly as contractors and civilian personnel followed evacuation procedures. She moved against the flow, heading toward the exit that would put her on the most direct route to the armory. Outside, the base had transformed. Normal training operations had ceased entirely. Security vehicles moved with purpose toward the armory complex. Personnel, in tactical gear, established perimeter positions. The casual, controlled chaos of a training environment had been replaced by the focused tension of potential combat. Elena adopted a fast walk that covered ground quickly without looking like running the kind of movement that didn't attract immediate attention. Her contractor clothes and identification badge gave her a civilian appearance, which meant security personnel would probably redirect her if they noticed her, but wouldn't immediately detain her. She spotted Morrison, Williams, and Davidson about 200 meters ahead, moving along the edge of a building that provided concealment from the main security response. They were being tactical about their approach, which was both impressive and concerning. Impressive because it showed they were applying their training. Concerning because it meant they were serious about getting close to the situation. If you were watching this unfold, would you admire their initiative or be frustrated by their recklessness? Elena closed the distance, using the same buildings for concealment. She needed to intercept them before they got close enough to the armory that security personnel would classify them as threats. As she moved, she could hear Morrison's voice carrying back from the group ahead. "We maintain visual distance, assess the situation, and only move closer if we see civilians in danger. We're not trying to be heroes, just providing backup if it's needed." The logic was almost sound. The execution was completely inappropriate. Candidates in training didn't get to self-deploy to security situations regardless of their good intentions. Elena came around the corner of a maintenance building and found herself 40 meters behind the three candidates. They were crouched near a dumpster, observing the armory complex across an open stretch of asphalt. "Morrison," Elena called out, her voice carrying authority despite its moderate volume. All three candidates spun around, their faces registering surprise and confusion at seeing the contractor woman from the chow hall suddenly appearing in a security situation. "Ma'am, you need to get to shelter," Morrison said, his tone patronizing. This could be a real threat. Elena walked toward them with measured steps, her posture shifting subtly. The slight slouch of a desk worker disappeared, replaced by the perfectly balanced carriage of someone comfortable with violence. "You need to return to your barracks. That's a direct order from Senior Chief Kowalski, which you ignored." Williams bristled. "With respect, ma'am, you're a contractor. You don't give us orders." "You're right," Elena agreed, still approaching. "I don't give you orders, but I am telling you that you're about to compromise an active security response, which could get you detained, injured, or killed." Davidson, who'd been quieter than the others, studied Elena with growing confusion. "How do you know what we're about to compromise? You're supposed to be assessing training resources, not analyzing security operations." It was a fair question. Elena had just revealed knowledge that didn't fit her cover story. She could deflect again, manufacture another explanation, or she could use this situation to accelerate the timeline on her real mission. Before she could respond, the armory building's side door burst open and two figures emerged in a rush. They weren't wearing military uniforms or security gear, they were in civilian clothes, moving with the jerky panic of people fleeing rather than the controlled urgency of authorized personnel. Morrison's group saw them at the same instant Elena did. "Contact," Morrison hissed, his body coiling as if preparing to move. "Hold position," Elena commanded, her voice sharp enough to freeze all three candidates. The two figures sprinted across the open ground toward a vehicle parked near the perimeter fence. Behind them, security personnel emerged from the armory, weapons raised but not firing. Proper protocol when the situation was still unclear and the fleeing individuals might be scared civilians rather than actual threats. But Elena's trained eye caught details that troubled her. The two fleeing figures moved with too much coordination. Their escape route was too well planned, and one of them was carrying something, a bag or case that he clutched protectively. "Security Chief Patterson," Elena spoke into her phone, which she'd kept active. "The two individuals fleeing the armory, have you confirmed their identity?" "Negative, Commander. They're not responding to commands to halt. We're trying to establish who they are before escalating force." Morrison turned to stare at Elena, his expression completely baffled. "Who are you talking to? And why are they calling you Commander?" Elena made a split-second decision. The situation was developing too rapidly to maintain her cover while also ensuring these candidates didn't do something catastrophically stupid. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. "My name is Commander Elena Vasquez," she said quietly, her eyes still tracking the fleeing figures. "I'm a Navy SEAL conducting an undercover assessment of this training facility. And right now, I need you three to stay exactly where you are and let security handle this situation." The revelation hit the three candidates like a physical blow. Their faces cycled through disbelief, shock, and dawning understanding, as a dozen small observations suddenly made sense. "You're a..." Williams couldn't finish the sentence. Later, Elena cut him off. "Right now, we have a developing situation that requires professional response, not eager candidates playing operator." Morrison's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "We were just trying to help." "I know," Elena replied, her tone softening slightly. "But help from untrained personnel in a security situation creates more problems than it solves. You don't have the identification, the communication equipment, or the authority to be here." The two fleeing figures reached their vehicle and jumped inside. The engine roared to life, and the car accelerated toward the perimeter gate. "They're running," Davidson observed unnecessarily. "Patterson." Elena spoke into her phone again. "The vehicle is heading for the north gate. What's the status of your intercept?" "Gate security is in position. We'll stop them there." But something felt wrong to Elena. The two individuals had moved too confidently, planned their escape too well. They wouldn't run for a gate they knew would be secured. Then she saw a service vehicle approaching from the opposite direction, moving too fast for normal base traffic. As it neared the fleeing car, it swerved sharply and crashed into the gate mechanism, jamming it partially open. "They've got support," Elena said into the phone. "Service vehicle just compromised the north gate." She was already moving before Patterson could respond, sprinting toward a security golf cart parked near the maintenance building. Behind her, she heard Morrison shout something, but she didn't stop to listen. The golf cart wasn't fast, but it was faster than running. Elena jumped into the driver's seat and accelerated toward the compromised gate, her mind running through tactical calculations. Two primary suspects in the fleeing vehicle, at least one accomplice in the service vehicle. Unknown additional support possible. No weapons on her person. Her service weapon and gear were locked in her apartment safe to maintain her civilian cover. She grabbed her phone. "Patterson, I'm pursuing the vehicle heading for the north gate. I need backup and authorization to engage if necessary." "Commander, you're not equipped for engagement. Let our response team handle this. Your response team is 60 seconds behind me. And these suspects are about to exit the base with whatever they took from the armory. I need authorization." A different voice came on the line, harder, more senior. "Commander Vasquez. This is Captain Morrison. Base Commander. What's your assessment of the threat level?" Elena's mind processed rapidly as she drove. Professional execution. Coordinated escape with support. Targeting a military armory. Either very sophisticated, thieves, or something worse. I recommend treating as high-level threat until proven otherwise. Authorization. Granted to pursue and observe. Do not engage without backup unless civilians are in immediate danger. Security teams are 30 seconds behind you. The golf cart's electric motor whined as Elena pushed it to maximum speed. Ahead, the fleeing vehicle had cleared the compromised gate and was accelerating down the access road that led away from the base. The service vehicle that had crashed the gate was abandoned. Its driver nowhere visible, probably already extracted by Confederates. Morrison, Williams, and Davidson appeared in Elena's peripheral vision, running hard to keep up with the golf cart. Their athletic conditioning gave them speed that almost matched the cart's maximum velocity. "Get back to your barracks," Elena shouted without slowing. "You're driving a golf cart after armed suspects," Morrison yelled back. "You need backup." "I have backup coming." "You're not qualified for this." But even as she said it, Elena recognized the terrible irony. These candidates were training to become SEALs operators who would face situations far more dangerous than this. They had the physical capability and tactical training to be useful. What they lacked was authorization, equipment, and command authority. The fleeing vehicle was pulling away, its superior speed overcoming Elena's head start. She needed to slow them down or mark their direction for the pursuing security teams. Then she spotted an opportunity. The access road curved sharply ahead before joining the main highway. If the fleeing vehicle maintained its current speed around that curve, basic physics would betray them. Elena accelerated the golf cart to its maximum speed and took the curve on the inside line, using her knowledge of the road to maintain velocity while the fleeing car had to slow for the sharper outside arc. For a brief moment, she pulled alongside the car's rear quarter panel. The driver, a male in his 30s with cold, professional eyes, spotted her and swerved aggressively, trying to force the golf cart off the road. Elena counter-steered, maintaining position for 3 crucial seconds. Long enough to memorize the car's license plate, note that both occupants were male and appeared to be in their 30s, and observe that the bag the passenger held was marked with military equipment codes. Then the car's superior power asserted itself, and it pulled away. Elena let it go, braking the golf cart to a controlled stop at the intersection with the main highway. Morrison and the others caught up moments later, breathing hard but not winded. Behind them, 2 security vehicles approached, with lights flashing. "Did you get the plate?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting he'd completely recalibrated his understanding of what he was witnessing. "Memorized it," Elena confirmed, along with vehicle description, occupant descriptions, and confirmation that the key SP took military property from the armory. She raised her phone as the security vehicles pulled up. "Patterson. Suspects heading north on Highway 75 inches. A dark blue Honda Accord. License plate 7 Charlie 739er Delta. 2 male occupants, 30s, professional demeanor. Confirmed possession of military equipment case marked with armory codes. Copy all, Commander. Highway Patrol is being notified. Excellent work." The security team leader, a master-at-arms chief named Reynolds, approached with his weapon still drawn but pointed safely downward. "Commander Vasquez? Captain Morrison ordered me to provide you backup and transport back to base." Elena nodded. "These 3 candidates," she gestured to Morrison, Williams, and Davidson, "disobeyed orders to shelter and followed me into the security situation. They need to be escorted back to their barracks and reported to their chain of command for disciplinary action." Morrison's face fell. After everything that had just happened, he was still going to face consequences for breaking protocol. Reynolds studied the 3 candidates with an expression somewhere between disappointment and understanding. "In the vehicle, gentlemen. We'll sort this out back at base." As the candidates climbed into the security vehicle, Morrison locked eyes with Elena one more time. "You really are a SEAL?" "Yes." "And you've been evaluating us this whole time?" "Yes." Morrison nodded slowly, processing this information. "Then you know we were just trying to help. We saw a situation developing and thought we could contribute." Elena's expression softened slightly. "I know. And in another context, that initiative and courage would be commendable. But discipline means following orders even when you think you have a better idea. Especially then." The security vehicle pulled away, leaving Elena standing alone at the roadside intersection. Her contractor cover was completely blown, at least with Morrison, Williams, and Davidson. By evening, their story would spread through the entire candidate population. She'd have to accelerate her assessment timeline significantly. What she'd planned to accomplish over a week would now need to happen in the next 48 hours. Her phone buzzed. Captain Morrison, the base commander, no relation to the candidate, wanted to debrief her immediately. Elena took one last look down the highway where the suspects had disappeared, then turned and began the walk back to base. Behind her, more security vehicles raced past, joining the pursuit of 2 men who'd been brazen enough to raid a military armory in broad daylight. The morning had started as routine observation. It had ended with her cover blown, 3 candidates facing disciplinary action, and a security breach that would trigger investigations at the highest levels. Some days, Elena reflected, assessment missions became operational faster than anyone planned. The base commander's office was decorated with the restrained professionalism typical of senior military leadership. Flags, unit citations, photos from various duty stations. Captain James Morrison sat behind his desk, his expression grave as Elena entered. "Commander Vasquez," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Hell of a morning." "Yes, sir." Elena remained standing until he indicated she should sit. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Security Chief Patterson tells me you provided critical intelligence during the pursuit. License plate, vehicle description, occupant details, all accurate and immediately actionable. Highway Patrol intercepted the suspects 15 minutes ago, recovered the stolen equipment, and arrested both individuals." "Glad to hear it, sir." "The stolen equipment," Morrison continued, "was a case containing classified communication devices. Not weapons, thankfully, but sensitive enough that their compromise could have created significant operational security problems. The 2 suspects appear to be foreign intelligence operatives, though that's still being confirmed." Elena absorbed this information silently. A training base being targeted for intelligence collection was concerning but not unprecedented. Foreign adversaries had long recognized that stealing equipment and documenting training procedures could provide valuable insights into U.S. military capabilities. Your quick thinking and tactical awareness helped us contain a serious security breach, Morrison said. For that, you have my thanks and the thanks of everyone on this base. Just doing my job, sir. Morrison's expression shifted to something more complicated, part appreciation, part frustration. Your job is supposed to be conducting a quiet assessment of training protocols. Instead, you're chasing foreign intelligence operatives in a golf cart. That's a significant deviation from the mission parameters. Yes, sir. The situation developed rapidly, and I made a judgment call that pursuing the suspects was more important than maintaining my cover. A judgment call that 3 Bud's candidates witnessed. Morrison, Williams, and Davidson are all reporting that you identified yourself as a Navy SEAL commander. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. Maintaining cover while also ensuring those candidates didn't compromise the security response wasn't feasible. I chose to reveal my identity to gain their compliance. Morrison nodded, his expression suggesting he understood the logic, even if he wasn't entirely pleased with the outcome. Those 3 candidates are currently being debriefed by Senior Chief Kowalski. They're facing disciplinary action for breaking protocol during a security situation. With respect, sir. They showed initiative and courage. Their execution was flawed, but their motivation was sound. Their motivation was to be heroes, Morrison replied bluntly, which is exactly the kind of individualistic thinking that gets people killed in real operations. They had orders to shelter. They chose to ignore those orders because they thought they knew better. Elena couldn't argue with that assessment. Morrison was right. Good intentions didn't excuse breaking the chain of command. However, the captain continued, Senior Chief Kowalski has recommended a non-punitive counseling session rather than formal disciplinary action. He believes this can be turned into a teaching moment about the difference between courage and recklessness. I'm inclined to agree. That seems appropriate, sir. Morrison stood and walked to his window, looking out across the training compound. Your cover is compromised, Commander. By this evening, every candidate at this facility will know that the contractor woman was actually a SEAL conducting some kind of evaluation. What's your plan for completing your assessment mission? Elena had been considering this question since the moment she'd revealed her identity to Morrison and his friends. Sir, I recommend we accelerate the timeline and conduct an open assessment for the remaining 48 hours. I've already gathered significant data on group dynamics, training protocols, and candidate performance. What I need now is to observe how candidates react when they know they're being evaluated by someone from the SEAL community. Morrison turned back from the window. You want to see how their behavior changes when the stakes are visible? Exactly, sir. Some candidates will rise to the occasion. Others will become self-conscious or try to show off. Both reactions are valuable assessment data. The captain considered this, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on his desk. It's unorthodox, but it might actually provide insights you couldn't get while undercover. All right, Commander. You have 48 hours to complete your assessment. I'll have Senior Chief Kowalski gather the candidates for an official briefing this afternoon. You can explain your presence and your mission in whatever way you think is most appropriate. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Morrison added as Elena stood to leave. Those 3 candidates who followed you, Morrison in particular. What's your assessment of them? Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. Morrison is physically talented, intelligent, and possesses natural leadership qualities. He also tends toward overconfidence and has difficulty working effectively with teammates he perceives as less capable. Williams and Davidson follow his lead, which amplifies both his strengths and his weaknesses. Is he SEAL material? Right now? No, sir. He's got the physical tools, but he lacks the humility and adaptive teamwork that separate good operators from exceptional ones. With proper mentorship and some ego-checking experiences, he could get there. Morrison nodded slowly. That's consistent with what his instructors have been saying. Thank you for the honest assessment, Commander. Elena left the commander's office and made her way across the compound toward the BUD's training area. The morning security incident had disrupted the normal training schedule, but candidates were already being reorganized into their standard routines. As she walked, she noticed something had changed. Candidates who'd previously ignored her or offered polite but dismissive nods were now watching her with undisguised curiosity and interest. Word was spreading faster than she'd anticipated. Two candidates approached with the slightly awkward deference of people unsure of the proper protocol. "Ma'am," one of them said, "is it true you're a SEAL?" Elena stopped. The question deserved a direct answer. "Yes. I'm Commander Elena Vasquez, currently assigned to training and evaluation. I've been conducting an assessment of this facility's training protocols." The second candidate's eyes widened. "You went through BUD's 8 years ago. Class 297. Both candidates absorbed this information with visible awe. Women had only been officially allowed into SEAL training a few years ago, which made Elena one of a very small number of female operators in the entire naval special warfare community. "Did you?" The first candidate hesitated, then pushed forward. "Did you see combat?" Elena's expression remained neutral. "3 deployments. But that's not relevant to my current mission here. What is relevant is observing how candidates perform under various training conditions." She left them standing there and continued toward the training area. But the encounter was immediately repeated a dozen times. Candidates approaching with questions, studying her with new eyes, recalibrating their entire understanding of the quiet contractor woman who'd been taking notes for the past 2 days. By the time Elena reached the training office, she'd confirmed what she'd suspected. Her cover being blown had fundamentally changed the dynamic. Candidates who'd ignored or dismissed her now saw her as someone whose opinion mattered, whose assessment could impact their futures. Senior Chief Kowalski was waiting in the training office, his expression somewhere between amused and exasperated. "Commander, you've created quite a stir. I've got candidates asking if they can redo yesterday's training evolutions because they didn't know you were watching." Elena smiled slightly. Human nature. People perform differently when they know they're being evaluated. "That's one of the problems with assessment missions," Kowalski agreed. "You can't get pure data once people know you're collecting it." "True. But you can get different data: how people respond to pressure, how they manage their image, whether they can maintain performance standards even when they're self-conscious." Kowalski nodded approvingly. "Captain Morrison called. Said you're doing an open assessment for the next 48 hours. What do you need from me?" "I need you to continue normal training operations as much as possible. Don't change anything because I'm here. And I need you to gather the scrap candidates this afternoon so I can brief them on my mission and what I'm evaluating. Consider it done." 1,500 hours, training classroom. "Perfect." Kowalski studied her for a moment. "Can I ask what prompted you to blow your cover this morning? From what I hear, you could have stayed hidden and let security handle the situation." Elena considered how much to share. 3 candidates were moving toward an active security situation without proper authorization or equipment. I assessed that revealing my identity was the fastest way to gain their compliance and prevent them from complicating the security response. "Morrison, Williams, and Davidson," Kowalski said. "The 3 musketeers of poor decision-making. They're good candidates physically, but they've got a concerning tendency to think they're already operators instead of students. That was my assessment as well. You recommended non-punitive counseling rather than formal discipline. They showed courage and, quote, initiative. Their judgment was flawed, but their hearts were in the right place. This seems like an opportunity to teach rather than punish." Kowalski's expression warmed slightly. "You sound like an instructor, Commander. Ever consider moving into training command permanently?" "I prefer operational assignments," Elena replied. "But I recognize that training the next generation is one of the most important missions we have." The senior chief extended his hand. "Welcome to the surface, Commander. Undercover assessment is finished. Now the real work begins." Elena shook his hand, appreciating the sentiment. He was right, the easy part of her mission was over. Now she had to conduct meaningful assessment, while every candidate knew they were being watched by someone whose opinion could influence their careers. The afternoon briefing drew every available candidate. Over 60 men crowded into the training classroom, their faces reflecting curiosity, anxiety, and in some cases, embarrassment. Morrison, Williams, and Davidson sat in the front row, their expressions carefully neutral. Senior Chief Kowalski called the room to attention as Elena entered. She walked to the front of the classroom with the confident bearing of someone completely comfortable with command authority. "At ease," she said. "Take your seats." The candidates settled, their attention focused entirely on her. Elena had briefed rooms full of senior officers, had conducted mission planning sessions where lives hung on every word. This was no different, she told herself. Just another professional briefing. "My name is Commander Elena Vasquez," she began. "I'm a Naval Special Warfare Officer currently assigned to training and evaluation. For the past 2 days, I've been conducting an undercover assessment of training protocols and candidate performance at this facility." Murmurs rippled through the room. Elena let them settle before continuing. "The purpose of my assessment is to evaluate whether current training methods are producing operators with the skills, mindset, and teamwork capabilities that naval special warfare requires. This is not an evaluation of individual candidates for purposes of selection or graduation. Your performance in my presence will not determine whether you pass or fail. Bud. S." She saw visible relief on several faces. "However," Elena continued, "your behavior, your decision-making, and your interactions with teammates do provide data about the overall effectiveness of the training program. In that sense, you are being evaluated not as individuals, but as representatives of the current training cohort." A hand went up in the middle of the room. Elena nodded acknowledgement. "Ma'am, when you say you've been observing us, does that include the times when we didn't know you were a SEAL? Like in the chow hall or the gym?" "Yes. That was the point of the undercover assessment, to observe authentic behavior rather than performance that's modified by the knowledge of being watched." Another hand. "What happens to the information you collect?" "I'm preparing a comprehensive report on training protocols, instructor effectiveness, facility resources, and observed candidate dynamics. That report will go to Naval Special Warfare Command and will be used to improve training programs for future candidates." Morrison raised his hand. Elena nodded toward him, curious what he would ask. "Ma'am, this morning when you pursued those suspects, was that part of your assessment mission?" The room tensed. Everyone had heard about the security incident, but the details were still fragmentary and confused. "No," Elena replied honestly. "That was a response to an immediate security situation. My primary mission is assessment. But all military personnel have a responsibility to respond to emergencies when they occur." Morrison pressed forward. "But you identified yourself to us as a SEAL commander. Was that necessary for the security response? Or was it to get us to follow your orders?" It was a sharp question, delivered without hostility but with genuine analytical interest. Elena appreciated the directness. "Both," she said. "I needed you to stop moving toward an active security situation, and I assessed that revealing my identity was the fastest way to achieve compliance. I also recognized that revealing my identity would compromise my undercover assessment, which meant I was making a trade-off between mission objectives." "What made you decide the security response was more important than your assessment mission?" Chen asked from the second row. Elena met his eyes. "Because assessment can be completed with a blown cover. Security responses can't be executed properly if unauthorized personnel complicate the tactical picture. I chose the mission that had immediate consequences over the mission with longer-term implications." The answer seemed to satisfy the questioners. Elena scanned the room, reading the expressions and body language. Most of the candidates were engaged and curious. A few looked intimidated by having a SEAL commander in their midst. Morrison's group of 12 sat together, their expressions ranging from respectful to calculating. "I have a question for all of you," Elena said, shifting the dynamic. "How many of you changed your behavior once you learned a SEAL was observing you?" Nearly every hand in the room went up. Elena nodded. That's honest, and I appreciate it. Here's what I want you to understand. The version of yourself that performed when you didn't know you were being watched, that's who you actually are. The version that shows up when you know you're being evaluated, that's who you want to be. The gap between those two versions is where growth happens. She let that sink in for a moment. For the next 48 hours, I'm going to continue observing training operations. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to ask questions. And yes, I'm going to form opinions about what I see. But those opinions aren't about whether you're good enough to be SEALs. They're about whether our training program is good enough to produce the quality of operators this community requires. Williams raised his hand. Ma'am, can I ask about your background? How long have you been in naval special warfare? Elena considered the question. Personal information wasn't strictly relevant to her mission. But building some rapport with the candidates might improve the quality of data she could collect. I graduated BUD/S 8 years ago, she said. Served with SEAL Team 7 for 6 years, including 3 combat deployments. Earned my commission through a combination of field performance and completion of officer candidate school. Currently assigned to training and evaluation, with occasional operational deployments when specific skill sets are required. Did you? Another candidate hesitated, then pushed forward. Did you face a lot of resistance as a woman going through BUD/S? Elena smiled slightly. Define a lot. Yes. There were people who didn't think women belonged in naval special warfare. Some of them were vocal about it. Some of them actively tried to make my experience harder. And some of them became my strongest advocates once they saw that I could meet the standards. What advice would you give to someone who's facing that kind of resistance? The same candidate asked. Stop caring about what other people think and start caring about whether you can execute the mission. Respect is earned through performance, not through demanding to be treated fairly. You want to belong in this community? Prove it through your actions, not your words. The response was blunt, but Elena saw several candidates nodding in agreement. They were all facing their own challenges and doubts. Gender was just one variable in a much larger equation of physical, mental, and emotional demands. Chen raised his hand again. Ma'am, yesterday in the gym I saw you doing a workout that seemed really advanced for someone who's supposedly a contractor. Was that you maintaining your cover, or was that you testing whether anyone would notice? Elena smiled. Both. I needed to maintain my operational fitness, which required serious workouts. But I was also curious whether anyone would observe the disconnect between my supposed contractor role and my actual physical capabilities. You were the first person to notice and comment on it. Was that a test? Everything is data, Elena replied. How candidates process information, what they notice, what they question, it all contributes to understanding how well the training program is developing analytical and observational skills. Kowalski stepped forward. All right, gentlemen, Commander Vasquez has given you the overview. For the next 2 days, you will continue normal training operations while she observes and documents. Treat her with the respect due to a senior officer. But don't modify your performance, trying to impress her. The best thing you can do is be authentic. The candidate stood as Elena prepared to leave. Morrison caught her eye and nodded once, a gesture of respect that carried more weight than words. As Elena left the classroom, she reflected on how dramatically the mission had shifted. The undercover phase had provided valuable baseline data about authentic behavior. This open phase would reveal how candidates managed performance under observation, and how the training program adapted to the presence of senior leadership. Different data, different insights, both valuable. She just had to make the next 48 hours count. The evening brought a shift in atmosphere across the training compound. Candidates who'd spent the day processing the revelation that a SEAL commander had been evaluating them began to relax back into their normal patterns. The novelty was wearing off, replaced by the grinding reality of training that continued regardless of who was watching. Elena observed dinner at the chow hall from an instructor's table rather than her previous isolated contractor position. The change in perspective was illuminating. From here, she could see the entire candidate section, watch the formation and dissolution of social groups, and monitor interactions that revealed leadership dynamics and peer relationships. Morrison's group of 12 sat at their usual table, but their behavior had modified noticeably. The casual mockery and aggressive dominance that had characterized their previous interactions had been replaced by more measured conversation. They knew they were being watched, and they were managing their image accordingly. Elena made a note. Group dynamics shift significantly under observation. Question whether modified behavior represents genuine growth or tactical adjustment to assessment environment. Parker, the young candidate who'd been the target of Morrison's group's subtle hazing 2 nights ago, sat with a different group, entirely. He seemed more relaxed, his shoulders less hunched, his participation in conversation more confident. Removing him from Morrison's sphere of influence had clearly benefited his morale. Kowalski joined Elena at the instructor's table, his tray loaded with the same high-calorie meal the candidates were eating. First impressions now that your cover is blown. The candidates are performing better, Elena observed. Sharper communication during training. More supportive teammate interactions. Better discipline. All of which confirms that they're capable of these standards, they just weren't maintaining them when they thought no one important was watching. That's the challenge of developing character, Kowalski replied. Anyone can perform well during inspection. The real measure is what they do when no one's looking. Agreed. Which is why the data from my undercover phase is more valuable than what I'm collecting now. Kowalski chewed thoughtfully. You mentioned Morrison in your conversation with the captain. What's your full assessment of him? Elena watched Morrison across the chow hall as she formulated her response. He's physically exceptional, probably in the top 5% of this class in terms of raw athletic capability. His tactical thinking is solid, and he has natural leadership presence. People follow him instinctively. But? Kowalski prompted. But he uses that leadership to build hierarchy rather than teams. He surrounds himself with people who reinforce his worldview and excludes or diminishes those who challenge it. That works fine in training environments where he can choose his associates. It fails catastrophically in operational environments where he has to work with whoever the mission requires. Have you seen him work effectively with people outside his core group? Elena pulled up her mental notes from the past 2 days. Yesterday's combat conditioning course paired him with Hernandez. Morrison's frustration with Hernandez's slower pace undermined their team performance. He blamed his partner rather than adapting his approach. Kowalski nodded. That's consistent with what we've observed. He's got the physical tools to be an exceptional operator. But his interpersonal skills are limiting his potential. Can it be taught? Elena asked. Or is it a fundamental personality trait that will resist modification? In my experience, it takes a significant failure to break through that kind of ego, something that forces them to recognize that their approach isn't working. Until that happens, they can intellectually understand the concept of adaptive teamwork while still defaulting to dominance behaviors. Elena considered this. So the question is whether the training program provides that kind of ego-checking experience in a controlled environment, or whether we wait for the field to deliver it in a potentially deadly context. Exactly. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at Morrison's table. Williams was standing, his voice raised enough to carry across the chow hall. I'm just saying that maybe we should consider. We're not considering anything. Morrison cut him off, his tone sharp. We already discussed this and made a decision. That's final. Williams sat back down, but his expression showed clear disagreement. Elena watched the interaction with interest. Dissent within Morrison's previously unified group suggested that the morning's events and the afternoon's briefing had created fractures in their cohesion. After dinner, Elena returned to her apartment to review the day's notes and begin structuring her formal assessment report. But as she sat down at her laptop, her phone buzzed with a message from Senior Chief Kowalski. Situation developing in candidate barracks. Your presence requested but not required. Your call. Elena grabbed her jacket and headed toward the barracks complex. Whatever was happening, it was significant enough that Kowalski thought she should know about it. She arrived to find Kowalski standing outside the barracks building with 2 other instructors. Through the windows, she could see candidates gathered in the common area, their attention focused on something or someone at the center of the room. What's the situation? Elena asked quietly. Morrison's group is fragmenting, Kowalski replied. Williams just confronted him publicly about the decision to break protocol this morning. Says Morrison convinced him and Davidson to follow him toward the armory, and now they're facing potential discipline because of his poor leadership. That's a legitimate criticism. It is. But the way Williams is delivering it is more about challenging Morrison's dominance than about actual accountability. This is a power struggle disguised as a principled stand. Through the window, Elena could see Morrison standing in the center of a circle of candidates. His posture defensive but controlled. Williams was gesticulating emphatically, clearly making his case to the assembled audience. Should we intervene? One of the other instructors asked. Kowalski shook his head. Not yet. Let's see if they can work this out themselves. Leadership conflicts are part of team development. We only step in if it becomes destructive or violates regulations. Elena watched the scene unfold with clinical interest. This was exactly the kind of authentic interaction that her assessment was designed to capture: how candidates handled conflict, how group dynamics shifted under pressure, how informal leadership structures emerged and dissolved. Davidson, the third member of the trio that had followed Morrison that morning, stood slightly apart from both Morrison and Williams, his body language suggesting he was uncomfortable being caught between two competing authority figures. Chen stepped forward, positioning himself between Morrison and Williams. His hands were raised in a peacekeeping gesture. We're all on the same side here. We're all trying to get through Bud S and become SEALs. Fighting each other doesn't help anyone achieve that goal. I'm not fighting, Williams replied. I'm pointing out that Morrison's decision this morning put all three of us at risk of disciplinary action. That's not leadership, that's recklessness. Morrison's face flushed. I made a tactical decision based on the information available at the time. You agreed to follow me. You had the option to refuse. You didn't present it as an option. You presented it as what we were doing, and Davidson and I followed because we trust you. That trust is starting to look misplaced. The accusation hung in the air. Around the circle, other candidates watched with expressions ranging from uncomfortable to fascinated. This kind of raw conflict was unusual in a training environment where candidates typically presented unified fronts to their instructors. Parker, the candidate who'd been the target of Morrison's group's mockery, spoke up from the edge of the circle. Can I say something? Morrison turned toward him, his expression suggesting he didn't particularly want to hear Parker's input, but several other candidates nodded encouragement. Earlier this week, you guys made me feel like I didn't belong here, Parker said quietly. You questioned my abilities, my preparation, my place in this program. It was subtle enough that I couldn't really complain about it, but it was real enough that it made me doubt myself. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. But then this morning, I watched Commander Vasquez handle a real security situation with more competence and professionalism than I've ever seen. And you know what I noticed? She didn't waste time doubting anyone or putting anyone down. She just executed the mission. Parker's voice gained confidence as he continued. Maybe the reason Williams is challenging you isn't because he's trying to take your spot. Maybe it's because he's died, recognizing that the way you lead doesn't match what actual SEAL leadership looks like. The observation was delivered without malice, just simple honesty. And it landed with devastating accuracy. Morrison looked around the circle of candidates, many of whom were nodding agreement with Parker's assessment. The social authority he'd built over weeks of training was visibly eroding in real time. Outside the barracks, Elena turned to Kowalski. This is exactly the kind of crisis moment you were talking about. Morrison's ego is being directly challenged by multiple sources simultaneously. What do you think he'll do? Kowalski asked. Either he'll adapt and grow, or he'll double down and isolate himself further. The next 60 seconds will determine which path he takes. Inside the barracks, Morrison stood silent for a long moment. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how he would respond to having his leadership fundamentally questioned. Finally, Morrison spoke. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its typical confidence. You're right. The admission shocked the room into even deeper silence. Williams, You're right that I made a bad call this morning. I convinced you and Davidson to follow me into a situation we weren't authorized to handle. That was poor leadership on my part." He turned to Parker. "And you're right that I've been treating teammates badly. Not everyone learns at the same pace, or has the same background. That doesn't make them less valuable to the team." Morrison looked around the circle, making eye contact with each candidate. "Commander Vasquez showed us what professional competence looks like. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, she just executed her mission. I've been so focused on proving I'm the best that I forgot the actual goal is to become an effective operator." Elena felt a small surge of professional satisfaction. This was growth happening in real time. Morrison was experiencing exactly the kind of ego-checking moment that Kowalski had described as necessary for his development. Williams studied Morrison for a moment, then extended his hand. "I'm still frustrated about this morning, but I appreciate you acknowledging it." Morrison shook his hand. "I don't expect you to trust me the same way you did before. I need to earn that back through better decisions." The tension in the room began to dissipate. Candidates started moving again, conversations resuming at lower volume. The crisis had passed, transformed into a learning moment rather than a destructive conflict. Kowalski turned to Elena with a slight smile. "Looks like your presence here is having effects beyond data collection, Commander." "That wasn't my intention," Elena replied. "But I won't complain about positive outcomes. You gave them a standard to measure themselves against. That's more valuable than any amount of instruction or discipline. They saw what right looks like. And it challenged their assumptions about leadership and competence." Elena considered this. Her mission was supposed to be assessment and observation, not active intervention in candidate development. But the line between those functions was blurrier than the mission planners had probably intended. "Should I modify my approach?" she asked. "Pull back to pure observation?" Kowalski shook his head. "No. What you're doing is working. These candidates are learning lessons they needed to learn. The fact that they're learning them from observing you rather than from formal instruction doesn't make the lessons less valuable." As Elena walked back to her apartment, she reflected on the evening's events. Morrison's public acknowledgement of his leadership failures represented exactly the kind of growth that naval special warfare needed from its candidates. The question was whether it would last, or whether he'd revert to his previous patterns once the immediate pressure of observation faded. She'd find out tomorrow, during the final, full day of her assessment mission. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Captain Morrison. "Heard about the situation in the barracks. Good outcome. Your impact on these candidates is already exceeding expectations. Report due in 48 hours. Make it count." Elena smiled slightly. The mission had evolved far beyond its original parameters. What had started as a simple undercover assessment had transformed into a comprehensive evaluation of training effectiveness, leadership development, and the powerful influence of professional standards embodied by someone who'd actually lived the life these candidates aspired to. Tomorrow would be her last chance to collect data and observe how the changes initiated tonight would manifest in actual performance. She intended to make every minute count. The final full day of Elena's assessment mission began differently than the previous two. When she arrived at the observation deck at 0445, she found Senior Chief Kowalski already setting up for what appeared to be a significant training evolution. Additional instructors were present, safety equipment was being staged, and the entire grinder had been marked with colored cones, creating distinct operational zones. "Morning, Commander," Kowalski greeted her. "Big day today. We're running a full mission simulation 12-hour evolution that combines everything the candidates have learned so far: navigation, weapons handling, small unit tactics, emergency medical response, and scenario-based decision-making." Elena studied the setup with professional interest. "This is more comprehensive than typical BUD/S training exercises." "It is," Kowalski agreed. "We run it once per class cycle, usually toward the end of training. It's designed to identify who can integrate multiple skill sets under sustained pressure. But we moved it up in the schedule. Because of my assessment." "Because of my assessment." Kowalski smiled slightly. "Captain Morrison thought you should see how candidates perform in the start, Closest thing to operational conditions we can create in a training environment. Figured it would give you better data than watching them run obstacle courses. Elena appreciated the captain's tactical thinking. A comprehensive mission simulation would reveal far more about candidate capabilities than any single skill evaluation. The candidates began arriving at 0500, their expressions showing a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Word had clearly spread about today's evolution. This was the test that separated those who could merely complete individual tasks from those who could function as integrated operators. Morrison's group of 12 arrived together, but their formation was noticeably different from previous days. Instead of Morrison leading from the front with his usual commanding presence, the group moved in a more distributed pattern. Williams and Chen flanked Morrison on either side, and Davidson walked slightly ahead as if scouting the path. The rigid hierarchy had been replaced by something more fluid and collaborative. Elena made a note. Morrison's group demonstrating adaptive structure. Leadership appears more distributed following last night's confrontation. Monitor whether this represents genuine change or temporary adjustment to observation. Kowalski called the assembled candidates to attention. Gentlemen, today's evolution is a full mission simulation. You'll be divided into 4 teams of 15 candidates each. Each team will receive a mission briefing with specific objectives, constraints, and success criteria. You'll have limited time to plan, limited resources to execute, and unlimited opportunities to fail if you don't work together effectively. He paused, scanning the faces before him. This is not about individual heroics. It's about team performance under pressure. Your team succeeds or fails as a unit. If even one member of your team doesn't complete the mission requirements, the entire team fails. The weight of that statement settled over the candidates like a physical force. Individual excellence meant nothing if the team failed. Commander Vasquez will be observing throughout the day. Kowalski continued. Her presence does not change the mission requirements or success criteria. Execute your mission as if she wasn't here. Elena appreciated the instruction, though she knew it was impossible for the candidates to truly ignore her presence. Human psychology didn't work that way. They would perform differently, knowing they were being observed by someone whose opinion mattered to their community. The candidates were divided into teams, using a randomization method that deliberately broke up established social groups. Morrison ended up on Team 3. Along with Williams and Parker, Chen and Davidson were assigned to Team 1. The separation was intentional, forcing Morrison to demonstrate leadership in a group where he hadn't already established dominance. Each team received a sealed envelope containing their mission briefing. Elena watched as they broke the seals simultaneously and began reading their assigned scenarios. Team 3's mission, which Elena could observe from Morrison's body language as he read, involved a simulated hostage rescue. They had to navigate to a target building, neutralize simulated guards, extract 3 hostages, played by instructors, and return to base, all within a 4-hour time window and under constant evaluation by roving instructor observers. The teams dispersed to their designated planning areas. Elena moved between them, clipboard in hand, observing how they approached the planning process. Team 1, led by a quiet but competent candidate named Rodriguez, immediately established a structured planning sequence. They reviewed the mission brief together, identified key challenges, and then divided into subgroups to develop courses of action for different mission phases. Their approach was methodical and inclusive. Every team member had a voice in the planning process. Team 2 struggled with competing leadership voices. 3 candidates all tried to take charge simultaneously, each convinced their approach was superior. The result was fragmented planning and growing frustration as the clock ticked down their preparation time. Team 4 took the opposite approach. They assigned one candidate as the undisputed leader, and everyone else simply followed his directives. Efficient, but potentially fragile if the designated leader's plan proved flawed. Team 3 Morrison's team fell somewhere in between. Morrison initially tried to take charge with his usual commanding presence, but Williams gently redirected him. Let's hear everyone's initial thoughts before we commit to an approach. Elena watched Morrison's face as he processed this gentle challenge to his authority. For a moment, his jaw tightened with the instinct to reassert control. Then his expression softened, and he nodded agreement. "Williams is right," Morrison said. "Everyone review the mission brief, and come back with your assessment of the primary challenges. We'll synthesize the best ideas into a comprehensive plan." It was a small moment, easily missed. But to Elena's trained eye, it represented significant growth. Morrison was choosing collaborative planning over individual dominance, prioritizing team effectiveness over personal authority. The planning phase lasted 45 minutes. Elena circulated among the teams, taking detailed notes on their processes, their communication patterns, and the emergence of both formal and informal leadership. When the planning phase ended, Kowalski gathered the teams for a final briefing. "You have your missions. You have your plans. Now execute. Remember, in real operations, plans rarely survive first contact with reality. Your ability to adapt is more important than the brilliance of your initial concept. Good luck, gentlemen." The teams moved out in staggered intervals, heading toward their respective operational areas scattered across the sprawling training compound. Elena followed Team 3, curious to see how Morrison's collaborative approach would translate to execution under pressure. The first phase of Team 3's mission involved a 2-kilometer navigation exercise to reach the target building. They moved in a tactical formation with designated point and rear security, communicating through hand signals to maintain noise discipline. Morrison positioned himself in the middle of the formation rather than at the front, another deliberate choice that distributed leadership throughout the team. Parker, surprisingly, was walking point, his navigation skills apparently earning him that responsibility despite his earlier struggles with team acceptance. 15 minutes into the movement, Parker stopped and raised his fist, the signal for the entire team to freeze. Morrison moved forward quietly to see what Parker had identified. Elena, observing from a 22-6 parallel route, could see what had triggered Parker's alert. An instructor observer positioned to simulate an enemy patrol, deliberately placed in their planned route to test their response to unexpected contacts. Morrison and Parker conferred in whispers. Elena couldn't hear their exact words, but she could see Morrison nodding as Parker pointed out an alternate route that would bypass the simulated threat. Morrison signaled the team to follow Parker's revised navigation, trusting his point man's judgment rather than overruling it. The team successfully bypassed the simulated patrol and reached their target building without compromise. Small victory, but significant. Morrison had demonstrated trust in a teammate he'd previously dismissed as weak. The hostage rescue phase tested the team's tactical coordination and decision-making under pressure. The building had multiple entry points, simulated guards at various positions, and a tight timeline before the hostages would be theoretically executed. Williams took tactical command of this phase, his prior military experience making him the logical choice. Morrison accepted this without apparent ego conflict, positioning himself where Williams directed him and executing his assigned role without trying to modify the plan. The team breached the building with reasonable efficiency, neutralized the simulated guards using marker rounds that left visible paint impacts, and located the 3 hostage instructors in an upstairs room. But then, complications emerged. One of the hostages, an instructor named Petty Officer Martinez, was simulating a serious leg injury and couldn't walk. The team would need to carry him back to base, which would slow their movement and make them vulnerable to the simulated enemy quick reaction force that was about to be activated. Williams looked to Morrison. "Your call. Do we split the team half carries Martinez, while the other half provides security? Or do we move as a complete unit and accept the slower pace?" Morrison didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the team. "Thoughts?" Several candidates offered opinions. Parker suggested a rotating carry system that would distribute the physical burden. Another candidate proposed a deception plan, leave an obvious trail in one direction while the actual team moved on a different route. A third recommended they request simulated helicopter extraction, which was technically available but would cost significant points on their mission score. Morrison listened to all the suggestions, then made his decision. "We use Parker's rotation system for the carry, but we also implement the deception trail. 2 volunteers take the obvious route and draw any pursuit, while the main element with the hostages moves on the secondary route. The volunteers link up with us at the rally point once they've confirmed the pursuit took the bait. It was a synthesis of multiple ideas rather than a single source solution. Elena made a note. Morrison demonstrating adaptive leadership, incorporating team input into decision-making rather than imposing predetermined solutions. 2 candidates volunteered for the deception mission without hesitation. They took off running on the obvious route, making noise and leaving clear signs of passage, while the main team moved more carefully on the alternate path. The plan worked. The instructor observers, playing the enemy quick reaction force, followed the deception trail, allowing the main team to complete their movement without contact. The 2 volunteers successfully evaded their pursuers and reached the rally point only 5 minutes behind the main element. Team 3 crossed the finish line with all 3 hostages, all team members present, and a completion time that placed them well within the success window. The candidates were exhausted, soaked with sweat, and visibly pleased with their performance. Kowalski was waiting at the finish line with his evaluation clipboard. Team 3, mission complete. Stand by for after-action review. But before the formal review could begin, something unexpected happened. Petty Officer Martinez, the instructor who'd played the injured hostage, stepped forward and addressed Morrison directly. "Candidate Morrison, can I have a word?" Morrison straightened, uncertain whether he was about to receive praise or criticism. "Yes, Petty Officer." Martinez studied him for a long moment. "I've been an instructor here for 4 years. I've played the injured hostage role in this evolution probably 50 times. And I've never seen a team leader handle it the way you just did." Morrison's expression showed confusion. "Petty Officer? Most team leaders in your position make the decision themselves, using their own tactical judgment. You solicited input from your entire team, synthesized multiple ideas into a coherent plan, and then executed with everyone buying in because they'd contributed to the solution. That's not just good leadership, that's exceptional leadership." Martinez extended his hand. Morrison shook it, his expression revealing genuine surprise at the recognition. "I don't know what changed in you over the past couple days," Martinez continued. "But whatever it was, it transformed you from a talented individual into a real team leader." Elena watched this exchange with quiet satisfaction. Morrison had internalized the lessons from his crisis moment faster than she'd anticipated. The growth was real, not just a temporary adjustment to observation. Williams approached Morrison after Martinez stepped away. "That was solid work, man. The Morrison from 3 days ago would have made that call alone and expected everyone to follow. This version is a lot more effective." Morrison smiled, but there was humility in it rather than pride. The Morrison from 3 days ago would have gotten people killed in a real operation. "I'm still learning what good leadership actually looks like." Parker joined them, extending his fist for Morrison to bump. "Thanks for trusting my navigation call back there. I know I haven't exactly proven myself to you guys." "You proved yourself today," Morrison replied simply. "That's what matters." Elena observed this interaction with the clinical precision of someone cataloging data for a formal report. But underneath the professional analysis, she felt genuine satisfaction. These candidates were learning lessons that would serve them throughout their careers, lessons about humility, teamwork, and the difference between authority and leadership. The other 3 teams completed their missions over the next several hours with varying degrees of success. Team 1 executed flawlessly, their methodical planning translating to smooth execution. Team 2 struggled with coordination failures stemming from their fractured planning process. Team 4 succeeded but showed dangerous over-reliance on their designated leader, suggesting potential vulnerability if he was incapacitated in a real operation. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the Pacific, Kowalski gathered all 4 teams for a comprehensive after-action review. The candidates assembled in the training classroom, their exhaustion evident but their attention focused. "Today's evolution revealed significant information about your capabilities," Kowalski began. "Some of you exceeded our expectations. Others revealed areas that need serious work before you're ready for operational assignments." He proceeded through each team's performance, highlighting both strengths and weaknesses with the blunt honesty that characterized effective military instruction. Candidates took notes, asked clarifying questions, and absorbed the feedback with varying degrees of defensiveness and receptivity. When Kowalski reached Team 3's performance review, his tone shifted slightly. Team 3 demonstrated something we don't see very often in training environments: genuine, adaptive leadership. Your planning was collaborative, your execution was flexible, and your decision-making under pressure synthesized multiple perspectives into effective solutions. He paused, letting the praise settle. Morrison, what changed in your approach to leadership between yesterday's training and today's evolution? Morrison stood, his expression thoughtful. Senior Chief, I recognized that I'd been confusing dominance with leadership. Real leadership means making the team more effective, not making myself look more important. That required me to listen more, control less, and trust my teammates' capabilities. What prompted that recognition? Morrison glanced briefly at Elena before responding. Multiple sources, Senior Chief. My teammates challenged me when my approach wasn't working, and I observed someone whose professional competence made my ego-driven approach look obviously inadequate. Kowalski nodded. That kind of self-awareness and willingness to adapt is what separates good operators from exceptional ones. Maintain that approach, and you've got a real future in this community. The formal review concluded. But Kowalski raised his hand to forestall the candidates from leaving. One more thing. Commander Vasquez has been observing your training for the past 3 days as part of a comprehensive assessment mission. She's seen you at your best and your worst. She's documented your strengths and your weaknesses. And now, she's going to provide you with her professional assessment. All eyes turned to Elena. She stood and moved to the front of the classroom, organizing her thoughts carefully. This was the moment where her assessment mission transformed from passive observation to active contribution. When I arrived at this facility 3 days ago, Elena began, I came with specific evaluation criteria provided by Naval Special Warfare Command. I was supposed to assess training protocols, instructor effectiveness, and facility resource allocation. Those were my official objectives. She paused, scanning the faces before her. But what I actually assessed was something more fundamental: whether this training program is producing the kind of operators that Naval Special Warfare needs for the challenges we face now and in the future. The room was silent, every candidate hanging on her words. The good news is that you're receiving excellent technical training. Your physical conditioning is first-rate. Your tactical skills are being developed systematically. Your weapons, handling, and navigation capabilities are solid. In those measurable, objective areas, this program is performing well. Elena's expression grew more serious. But technical skills are only part of what makes an effective SEAL. The harder part, the part that can't be easily measured or trained, is character, humility, adaptive thinking, the ability to work effectively with people you didn't choose and might not particularly like. And in those areas, this class showed significant weaknesses when I first arrived. She let that assessment land without softening it. However, Elena continued, I also observed something remarkable over the past 3 days. When confronted with your weaknesses, when challenged by teammates, when exposed to professional standards that exceeded your current capabilities, when forced to recognize gaps between your self-image and reality, many of you demonstrated the capacity for genuine growth. Her eyes found Morrison. Some of you transformed from talented individuals into effective team leaders. You learned that strength comes from lifting others up, not from keeping them beneath you. She shifted her attention to Parker. Some of you found confidence in your own capabilities despite being dismissed or underestimated by your peers. You proved that quiet competence often outlasts loud arrogance. Elena's gaze moved to Williams and Chen, and some of you showed the courage to challenge leaders when their approach was flawed, to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable, to prioritize team effectiveness over personal relationships. She addressed the entire room again. These are the qualities that Naval Special Warfare needs. Not just physical capability or tactical skill, but the character to adapt, to grow, to put mission and team above ego and comfort. Elena pulled out her phone and held it up. I'm submitting my assessment report to NSWC Command in approximately 6 hours. That report will document everything I've observed over the past 3 days. It will recommend changes to training protocols and instructor approaches. And it will note that this particular class of candidates, despite initial weaknesses, demonstrated exceptional capacity for growth when properly challenged. The relief on several faces was visible. They'd been worried that Elena's assessment might threaten their prospects of completing BUDS and earning their tridents. However, Elena added, her tone sharpening, capacity for growth means nothing if you don't maintain it. The lessons you learned this week need to become permanent changes in how you operate, not temporary adjustments to observation. When I leave tomorrow, the real test begins. Can you maintain these standards when no one's watching? She let the question hang in the air for a moment. That's the difference between performing and becoming. Anyone can perform well during inspection, but operators become people who maintain those standards because it's who they are, not because someone's evaluating them. Elena closed her notebook and prepared to conclude her remarks. But before she could, Rodriguez, the quiet candidate who'd led Team 1, raised his hand. Ma'am, permission to speak? Go ahead. Rodriguez stood. Ma'am, I think I speak for most of us when I say that having you here, seeing what a SEAL operator actually looks like in terms of professionalism and competence, that's been more valuable than any amount of instruction. You gave us a standard to measure ourselves against. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Chen stood as well. Ma'am, when you first arrived, most of us probably dismissed you as just another contractor doing paperwork. I know I did. But watching you handle that security situation yesterday, seeing your tactical awareness and decision-making under pressure, it completely recalibrated my understanding of what competence looks like. More candidates stood, adding their voices to the acknowledgement. Even Davidson, who'd been relatively quiet throughout Elena's assessment, rose to his feet. Ma'am, the respect we're showing you right now, it's not because of your rank or your position. It's because you earned it through your actions. You demonstrated the standards you're asking us to maintain. That's real leadership. The entire room was standing now. 60 candidates on their feet in a spontaneous gesture of respect that hadn't been ordered or prompted. Their faces showed genuine admiration and gratitude, not the performative deference that rank sometimes commanded. Elena felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. She'd conducted dozens of training assessments and evaluation missions, but she'd never received this kind of unscripted recognition from the candidates she was evaluating. Senior Chief Kowalski stepped forward. Gentlemen, I think Commander Vasquez deserves more than just standing ovation. She deserves the recognition our community gives to those who embody our highest standards. He came to attention and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. The gesture hit Elena with unexpected emotional force. Kowalski was a decorated veteran with over 2 decades of service. His salute wasn't protocol, it was genuine respect between warriors. One by one, the candidates followed Kowalski's lead. Morrison saluted first, his form perfect, his expression showing none of the arrogance that had characterized his earlier bearing. Williams and Parker followed simultaneously. Then Chen, Davidson, Rodriguez. Within seconds, the entire room stood at attention, 60 hands raised in synchronized salute to a commander who'd shown them what their future could look like if they maintained the standards she'd demonstrated. Elena returned the salute, her movements crisp and professional despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her composure. She held the salute for 3 long seconds, longer than protocol required, making sure every candidate felt the weight of the recognition flowing in both directions. When she finally dropped her hand, the room relaxed. But something had fundamentally changed. The salute had transformed her relationship with these candidates from evaluator to subject into something deeper, a connection between those who'd lived the life and those who aspired to it. Kowalski dismissed the candidates, and they filed out of the classroom in small groups. Their conversations animated but thoughtful. Several stopped briefly to thank Elena personally. Their words simple but sincere. After the room emptied, Kowalski turned to Elena with a slight smile. That wasn't exactly standard protocol, Commander. No, Elena agreed. It wasn't. But it was exactly what they needed. You gave them a vision of what they're working toward. You made the abstract concept of SEAL standards concrete and achievable. Elena collected her notes, organizing them for the final report she'd be writing tonight. Do you think the changes will last? Or will they revert to old patterns once I'm gone? Kowalski considered the question carefully. Some will maintain the standards, others will slip back into comfortable habits. That's human nature. But you've planted seeds, Commander. How those seeds grow will depend on the candidates themselves, and on whether we instructors reinforce the lessons you've taught. He extended his hand. Thank you for your service to this community. Your assessment will make us better at what we do. Elena shook his hand. Thank you for creating an environment where growth is possible. The candidate's transformation this week is as much a credit to your instruction as it is to any observation I provided. As Elena left the training facility and walked back toward her apartment in the gathering twilight, she reflected on the day's events. The mission simulation had revealed exactly what she'd hoped to document: how candidates performed under integrated pressure, how leadership dynamics evolved, and how quickly growth could occur when the right challenges were presented. But the salute moment had revealed something she hadn't anticipated. Her assessment mission had transformed from passive observation into active leadership. She'd influenced these candidates not through instruction or command, but through embodying the standards she was evaluating them against. That influence carried responsibility. These candidates would carry forward the lessons they'd learned this week. Some would apply them well, others would struggle, but all of them had been given a glimpse of what excellence looked like, and that vision would shape their development for years to come. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Captain Morrison. Heard about the salute. Unprecedented response from a candidate class. Your impact on this program extends far beyond your written assessment. Well done, Commander. She smiled slightly as she typed her response. They earned the recognition through their growth, sir. I just provided the standard to measure themselves against. Tomorrow, she would leave. Her formal assessment would be complete, her recommendations submitted. But the real work, the hard work of maintaining standards and continuing growth, would fall to the candidates and their instructors. She could only hope that the seeds planted this week would find fertile ground. Elena spent the evening in her apartment, typing her comprehensive assessment report. The document ran to 43 pages, combining statistical analysis of training protocols with qualitative observations about candidate development and instructor effectiveness. She documented everything she'd witnessed: the good, the bad, and the transformational. The section on Morrison was particularly detailed. She described his initial leadership style, the crisis point that forced him to confront his weaknesses, and the remarkable growth he'd demonstrated in the following 24 hours. But she also noted the uncertainty about whether these changes would persist once the immediate pressure of observation faded. Recommendation: Morrison demonstrates exceptional physical capabilities and significant leadership potential. However, his tendency toward ego-driven decision-making represents a potential vulnerability that could manifest in operational environments. Recommend close mentorship by senior enlisted personnel who can reinforce collaborative leadership approaches while providing immediate correction if he reverts to dominance-based patterns. She made similar assessments for other candidates who'd stood out during her observation, both positively and negatively. The report was honest but not cruel, analytical but not dismissive. Each candidate was evaluated as a complete picture rather than a collection of isolated incidents. By 2300 hours, the report was complete. Elena encrypted it with military-grade security protocols and uploaded it to the secure Naval Special Warfare Command server. A confirmation message appeared. Document received. Assessment complete. Return to home station authorized. Her mission was officially over. But as Elena prepared for bed, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Senior Chief Kowalski. Late-night calls from instructors were rarely good news. Kowalski. Elena answered. What's happening? Commander, we've got a situation developing. Morrison just requested an emergency meeting with me and Bolle, the training officer. Says it's urgent and involves admission of a serious infraction. He's in my office now, and he's specifically asking if you can be present. Elena checked her watch. I'm not officially part of your chain of command, Chief. Why would he want me there? He says it's because you're the person who made him understand what integrity actually means. Those were his exact words. Elena processed this rapidly. Morrison requesting an emergency meeting to confess an infraction was either a sign of genuine character growth or a calculated move to manage potential fallout from something he knew was about to be discovered. Either way, his specific request for her presence suggested this was significant. "I'll be there in 10 minutes," Elena said. She dressed quickly in her uniform, no longer maintaining the contractor fiction, and made her way across the darkened compound to the training office. Lights blazed in the windows despite the late hour. Morrison sat in Kowalski's office, his posture rigid with tension. The training officer, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, was also present, her expression concerned. They all stood as Elena entered. "Commander Vasquez," Hayes said formally, "thank you for coming. Candidate Morrison has requested to make a statement regarding a serious violation of training protocols. He insisted you be present for this disclosure." Elena took a seat and nodded to Morrison. "I'm here. What do you need to say?" Morrison took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Ma'am, 3 weeks ago, I cheated on a written examination covering tactical planning procedures. I had access to the answer key through a connection with someone in the administrative office. I used that information to achieve a perfect score on the exam." The confession landed like a bomb in the small office. Kowalski's expression darkened. Hayes leaned forward, her posture shifting from concerned to interrogatory. "How did you obtain access to the scripting answer key?" Hayes demanded. Morrison's face flushed with shame. "One of the civilian contractors working in the admin building is the sister of a guy I went to college with. I asked her to help me out, and she gave me access to the file server, where the exam materials are stored. I told her it was just to study more effectively, but we both knew what I was really doing." "Who else was involved?" Kowalski asked, his voice hard. "Did other candidates use the same access?" "No, Senior Chief. I kept it to myself. I thought about sharing it with my group, but I wanted to maintain the advantage of being the only one with perfect scores." The admission of selfish motivation, alongside the cheating, made the infraction even worse. Hayes pulled out a notepad. "I need the name of the civilian contractor who provided you access." Morrison hesitated, conflict visible on his face. "Ma'am, I don't want to get her in trouble. This was my fault, not hers." "You don't get to make that determination," Hayes replied sharply. "She violated security protocols and compromised the integrity of our testing process." "Her name, Morrison." Morrison provided the name, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena recognized it. The contractor he named was someone she'd seen working in the administrative building during her assessment. A young woman who probably hadn't fully understood the seriousness of what she was facilitating. "Why are you coming forward with this now?" Elena asked quietly. "What prompted this confession?" Morrison looked directly at her. "Because over the past 3 days, I've been forced to recognize that everything I thought I knew about being a good operator was wrong. I thought being the best meant outperforming everyone else by any means necessary. But watching you, ma'am, watching how you handled yourself with absolute integrity even when you could have taken shortcuts, made me understand that real strength comes from honesty, not from gaming system." He turned back to Kowalski and Hayes. "I can't become the kind of SEAL I saw Commander Vasquez demonstrate while carrying this lie. It's been eating at me since the moment I did it, but I convinced myself it didn't matter as long as I performed well in the field. I know now that's not true. Integrity in small things is what makes integrity in big things possible." The office fell silent as everyone processed Morrison's words. Elena found herself experiencing conflicting emotions: pride that her example had prompted this confession, and disappointment that Morrison had compromised himself in the first place. Kowalski spoke first, his tone grave. "Morrison, you understand that academic dishonesty is grounds for immediate dismissal from BUD/S? That this confession likely ends your SEAL aspirations?" "Yes, Senior Chief. I understand." "Then why confess? Why not just carry this secret and hope it never surfaced?" Morrison's answer was simple and devastating. "Because I'd rather fail with integrity, then succeed through cheating. Commander Vasquez showed me that excellence means doing things right even when no one's watching. I failed that standard. The least I can do now is face the consequences honestly. Hayes stood and walked to the window, her back to the room as she processed this development. Kowalski rubbed his face wearily. Elena remained silent, recognizing this was their decision to make, not hers. After a long moment, Hayes turned back. "Morrison, you're suspended from all training activities effective immediately. You'll be confined to your quarters pending a formal investigation and disciplinary board. The civilian contractor will be interviewed and likely face termination and possible criminal charges for unauthorized access to secure systems." Morrison nodded, accepting the sentence without protest. "However," Hayes continued, her tone softening slightly, "I want you to understand something. In my 10 years as a training officer, I've dealt with dozens of integrity violations. Candidates get caught cheating, lying, or breaking regulations all the time. But in that entire decade, I've never had a single candidate voluntarily confess to a serious infraction without being prompted by investigation or discovery. Not one." She studied Morrison carefully. "Osawation Team Zero Way. What you did 3 weeks ago was wrong and disqualifies you from this program. But what you did tonight, coming forward voluntarily, accepting full responsibility, refusing to minimize your actions, that demonstrates the kind of character we need in naval special warfare. It's just 3 weeks too late." The tragedy of the situation was palpable. Morrison had finally learned the lesson he needed to learn, but only after making a choice that would end his opportunity to apply that lesson as a SEAL. Kowalski stood. "I'll escort Morrison to his quarters. Commander Vasquez, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, please remain here. We need to discuss how this impacts the assessment, and what recommendations should be forwarded to command." Morrison stood as well. Before leaving, he turned to Elena one final time. "Ma'am, thank you for showing us what right looks like. I'm sorry I didn't understand it in time to save my career. But I'm grateful I understand it now, before I had the chance to fail when it really mattered, when teammates' lives depended on my integrity." Elena met his eyes. "Morrison, what you did tonight took more courage than most people show in their entire careers. You chose principle over self-interest, knowing it would cost you everything you've worked for. That's not failure. That's growth." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Your path to becoming a SEAL may be over, but your path to becoming the kind of person who lives by SEAL values, that path is still open. Don't waste this lesson." Morrison saluted, his form perfect despite the tears threatening to spill from his eyes. Elena returned the salute, honoring the man he was becoming, rather than the candidate he'd been. Kowalski led Morrison out, leaving Elena alone with Hayes. The lieutenant commander sank back into her chair with a heavy sigh. 3 days, Hayes said wonderingly. "You were here for 3 days. And you generated enough impact to prompt a voluntary confession that will end a candidate's career. I'm not sure whether to thank you or blame you." "Neither," Elena replied. "Morrison made his own choices, both the choice to cheat and the choice to confess. I just provided a standard that forced him to confront the gap between who he was and who he wanted to become." Hayes nodded slowly. "Your assessment report is already submitted, but this development needs to be documented. Will you add an addendum?" "Yes." Morrison's confession demonstrates both the potential for character development and the tragic consequences of compromising integrity. It's a data point that strengthens my recommendations about the importance of emphasizing ethical decision-making throughout the training pipeline. Elena pulled out her laptop and began drafting the addendum, while Hayes made notifications to the chain of command. An investigation would be launched, the civilian contractor would be interviewed, and Morrison would face a formal disciplinary board within 72 hours. The outcome was predetermined. Academic dishonesty carried mandatory dismissal from Bud.S. But the manner of his exit would be different than most washouts. Morrison would leave with his integrity restored, having chosen honesty over expedience. As Elena typed the final paragraphs of her addendum, she reflected on the complex mathematics of character development. Morrison had grown more in 72 hours than many people grew in years. But that growth had come too late to save the career he'd compromised through earlier poor choices. Was it better to learn these lessons now, in training, where the consequences were career-ending but not life-ending? Or would it have been better for him to maintain his deception, earn his trident, and potentially face a more catastrophic integrity failure in an operational environment? Elena knew the answer. Training was exactly where these lessons needed to be learned. The fact that Morrison would pay a heavy price for his education didn't make the lesson less valuable, it made it more real. She submitted the addendum at 0147 hours and closed her laptop. Her assessment mission was truly complete now. Extended unexpectedly by Morrison's confession, but ultimately reinforcing the core findings of her original report. Hayes stood and extended her hand. "Commander, whatever Naval Special Warfare is paying you for assessment missions, it's not enough. You've generated more meaningful change in 3 days than most evaluators achieve in 3 months." Elena shook her hand. "The candidates did the changing, ma'am. I just held up a mirror." As she walked back to her apartment through the pre-dawn darkness, Elena felt the weight of her impact settling heavily on her shoulders. Her mission had been observation and assessment, but observation changed what was being observed, and assessment influenced the people being evaluated. Morrison's career was over, ended by a choice he'd made before she'd ever arrived at this facility. But his character had been saved by the choice he'd made after encountering standards that challenged him to become better. That mathematics was complicated, painful, and ultimately necessary. The sun would rise in a few hours. Elena would pack her belongings, conduct final handover briefings with Kowalski and Hayes, and return to her regular duty station. The candidates would continue their training, shaped by the lessons of the past 3 days but ultimately responsible for their own growth. And Morrison would face his disciplinary board. His SEAL dreams ended but his integrity restored. Some victories, Elena reflected, looked like defeats until you understood what was really being won. Elena's departure was scheduled for 0900 hours, which gave her time for a final morning observation of candidate training. She arrived at the grinder at 0530, finding the candidates assembled for their usual morning physical training session. The atmosphere was different. Word of Morrison's confession had spread through the candidate barracks. Overnight naval communities were notorious for rapid information transmission. The candidates moved with subdued energy, processing the loss of one of their most visible leaders. Morrison's absence from formation was a physical gap that everyone noticed but no one directly acknowledged. Senior Chief Kowalski addressed the assembled candidates with his usual gruff directness. "I know you're all aware of last night's development. One of your classmates made choices that ended his time in this program. Those choices and their consequences are not open for discussion or speculation. What is open for discussion is what you learn from this situation." He paused, scanning the faces before him. In naval special warfare, integrity is not negotiable. It's not something you can compromise when it's convenient and then restore when it matters. Integrity is who you are when no one's watching, when the consequences seem manageable, when you think you can get away with something. It's the foundation everything else is built on. Kowalski's voice carried across the grinder with the weight of 2 decades of experience. Your classmate violated that foundation. But he also demonstrated something rare and valuable, the courage to confess voluntarily, to accept consequences, and to choose principle over self-interest. That second choice doesn't erase the first, but it does show the kind of character development we're trying to build in this program. Williams raised his hand. "Senior Chief, are we allowed to speak with Morrison before he leaves?" Kowalski considered the question. "That's between you and him. During his restricted hours. He's confined to quarters during duty hours. But evening free time is his to use, as he chooses within the confinement restrictions." Chen spoke up next. "Senior Chief, will there be other integrity violations investigated based on Morrison's confession? Are others under suspicion?" Morrison stated explicitly that his violation was individual, not group-based. "We have no evidence suggesting broader compromise. But let me be crystal clear, if anyone else in this class has engaged in academic dishonesty, security violations, or any other integrity failures, I strongly recommend you follow Morrison's example and come forward voluntarily. The consequences for confession are severe. The consequences for getting caught are worse. The message landed with visible impact. Several candidates shifted uncomfortably, their body language suggesting Kowalski's words had hit close to home. Elena observed this dynamic with professional interest. Morrison's confession had created a ripple effect. Other candidates would now be forced to examine their own choices and consider whether they were maintaining the standards being demanded of them. The morning training session proceeded with the candidates working through a punishing combination of running, calisthenics, and surf torture. Elena watched from her usual observation position, taking final notes on instructor techniques and candidate performance. Parker, who'd been one of Morrison's targets earlier in the week, was performing with noticeably increased confidence. His physical capabilities hadn't changed, but his mental approach had transformed. He moved through the exercises with determined focus, no longer glancing around nervously to see who might be judging him. Williams and Davidson stayed close together during the session, their friendship apparently strengthened by the crucible of the past few days. They encouraged each other through the harder evolutions, their teamwork natural and supportive. Rodriguez continued to demonstrate the quiet competence that had characterized his leadership of Team 1 during yesterday's mission simulation. He wasn't the loudest or most visible candidate, but people gravitated toward him naturally, recognizing his steady reliability. As the training session concluded, Kowalski approached Elena. "Commander, the candidates have requested permission to gather informally to say goodbye before you depart. I told them it was your decision." Elena considered this. Formal farewells weren't typical for assessment missions. Evaluators usually slipped away quietly to maintain the illusion of objective distance. But this mission had evolved beyond standard parameters from the moment she'd revealed her identity. "Where and when?" she asked. "Training classroom. 0830. Voluntary attendance. No formation or official ceremony. Just candidates who want to say thanks. I'll be there." At 0830, Elena entered the training classroom to find nearly 40 candidates, waiting. Not the entire class, but a substantial majority. They stood in loose groups rather than formal ranks, their expressions reflecting a mixture of respect and genuine affection. Williams stepped forward as the informal spokesman. "Ma'am, we know you're heading out this morning. We wanted to thank you for what you showed us this week. You gave us a standard to measure ourselves against. And you did it without speeches or lectures, just by being excellent at what you do." Chen added, "You also kicked our asses in the most professional way possible. You made us realize how far we still have to go and how much work it's going to take to get there. That's a gift, even if it didn't feel like one at the time." Parker spoke up from the back of the room. "Ma'am, you showed me that quiet competence is more powerful than loud arrogance. That lesson probably saved my career here. Thank you." Rodriguez approached with something wrapped in cloth. "Ma'am, we wanted to give you something to remember this class by. It's not much, but it's meaningful to us." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a custom-made challenge coin. One side showed the BUD/S class number with the dates of Elena's assessment visit. The other side bore a simple inscription. "Excellence observed. Standards elevated. We had it made last night," Rodriguez explained. "Rush job from a shop in Coronado that does coins for SEAL teams. Everyone who's here contributed to the cost. It's our way of saying that your impact on us was real and lasting." Elena took the coin, her professional composure cracking slightly. Challenge coins were sacred in military culture. They represented bonds between warriors, recognition of shared experience, and membership in exclusive communities. The fact that candidates had created one for her, at their own expense and initiative, carried profound meaning. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice tight with emotion she couldn't fully suppress. "This means more than you know." Davidson stepped forward. "Ma'am, can we ask what's going to happen to Morrison? We know he violated integrity standards, but he also showed real growth in the end. Is there any chance he gets a second opportunity?" Elena chose her words carefully. "Morrison's situation will be adjudicated through formal proceedings. I can't predict outcomes, and I wouldn't be appropriate for me to try." What I can tell you is that his voluntary confession demonstrated character that most people never develop. Whether that character gets a chance to serve in this community is not my decision to make." She paused, looking around the room at the assembled faces. "But I want you all to understand something important. Morrison's career in naval special warfare is likely over because he made a bad choice and then made a courageous choice to confess. That's tragic. But it's far less tragic than the alternative: maintaining his deception, earning his trident through dishonest means, and then potentially failing an integrity test in the field where the consequences are measured in lives lost rather than careers ended." The candidates absorbed this soberly. Training is where you're supposed to make mistakes and learn from them. Elena continued. "Morrison made his mistake, and he's paying the price. But every single one of you is one bad choice away from being in his position. The question you need to ask yourselves is, what standards are you maintaining when no one's watching? What compromises are you justifying because you think they don't really matter?" She held up the challenge coin they'd given her. "This says, excellence observed, standards elevated." That's backwards. Standards should be elevated whether or not excellence is being observed. The goal isn't to perform well when you know you're being evaluated. The goal is to become the kind of person who maintains those standards because it's who you are. Williams nodded slowly. "Ma'am, that's the lesson we're all taking forward. We saw what right looks like, and now we can't unsee it. That raises the bar for all of us." Elena checked her watch. Her transport would be arriving in 15 minutes. "I need to finish packing and complete my departure checklist. But I want to leave you with one final thought." The candidates leaned forward slightly, not wanting to miss her closing words. "You're all here because you want to be SEALs. You want the trident, the reputation, the recognition that comes with being part of this community. That's natural and understandable. But the trident isn't the goal, it's a symbol of the person you've become through the process of earning it. Focus on becoming someone worthy of the trident, and the trident will follow. Focus on getting the trident by any means necessary, and even if you succeed, you'll be a pretender wearing a sacred symbol you didn't truly earn." She stood. "Thank you for allowing me to observe your training. Thank you for demonstrating the capacity for growth. And thank you for this coin, which I will carry with me as a reminder that excellence is not a destination but a continuous choice." The candidates came to attention without being ordered, rendering a final salute that Elena returned with the full ceremony it deserved. Then they broke formation and several approached individually to shake her hand or offer personal thanks. Chen was among them. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for dismissing you that first day in the Chow Hall. I made assumptions based on appearance rather than observing actual capability. That was lazy and unprofessional." "Apology accepted," Elena replied. "But don't apologize to me. Commit to not making the same mistake with the next person whose capabilities you underestimate." Parker approached shyly. "Ma'am, you probably don't remember, but you told me during one of your observations that strength is what you do for the smallest person in the room. That changed how I see my place here." Elena smiled. "I remember. You were sitting alone in the Chow Hall, trying to be invisible. You're not trying to be invisible anymore. That's growth." Williams was last. "Ma'am, Morrison asked me to give you this." He handed Elena a folded letter. "He wrote it last night after his confession. Said he wanted you to know that your example gave him the courage to do the right thing, even though it cost him everything." Elena took the letter but didn't open it immediately. "How is he doing?" "About how you'd expect. Devastated but peaceful, if that makes sense. Like he's carrying a heavy burden, but at least he's not carrying a lie anymore. Tell him." Elena paused, considering what message to send. "Tell him that integrity restored is worth more than opportunities lost. And tell him that naval special warfare may not be his path, but living by its values still can be." Williams nodded and stepped back. Elena left the classroom and returned to her apartment for final packing. Her duffel bag contained the same civilian clothes she'd arrived in, plus the challenge coin the candidates had given her, Morrison's unopened letter, and 43 pages of assessment documentation that would influence training protocols for years to come. At 0900 hours precisely, a black sedan arrived to transport her back to her home station. Senior Chief Kowalski and Lieutenant Commander Hayes were present for the formal departure. "Commander," Hayes said, shaking Elena's hand, "your assessment exceeded every expectation. The recommendations you've made will be implemented across the entire BUD's program." Kowalski added, "More importantly, you reminded us why we do this work. It's not about producing physically capable operators, it's about developing people of character who happen to be physically capable. Thank you for that recalibration." Elena returned their handshakes. "Thank you for creating an environment where growth is possible. The candidate's transformation this week is a credit to your modest instruction and leadership." As the sedan pulled away from the training facility, Elena looked back through the rear window. Candidates were forming up for their mid-morning training evolution, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Somewhere in that formation, Parker was standing taller than he had 4 days ago. Williams and Davidson were supporting each other through another crucible. Rodriguez was leading with quiet competence, and Morrison was absent, confined to quarters. His career ended but his integrity restored. The sedan turned a corner, and the training facility disappeared from view. Elena settled back in her seat, and finally opened Morrison's letter. "Commander Vasquez, I'm writing this at 0230 hours. 3 hours after confessing to an integrity violation that will end my time in BUD.S. I should be devastated. Part of me is. But mostly, I feel relief. For 3 weeks, I've carried the weight of knowing I didn't earn my scores honestly. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was still performing well in physical training, still contributing to my team, still on track to become a SEAL. But after watching you handle yourself with absolute integrity in everything you did, I realized I was building my entire career on a foundation of lies. You showed us that excellence means doing things right even when no one's watching. I failed that standard, but I'm grateful I failed it now, in training, rather than later when the consequences could have been measured in teammates' lives lost because they trusted someone who didn't deserve that trust. I don't know what's next for me. Probably civilian life, probably a career that has nothing to do with military service. But whatever I do, I'm going to do it with the integrity you demonstrated. I'm going to be someone who maintains standards because it's who I am, not because someone's watching. Thank you for showing me what right looks like. I'm sorry I learned the lesson too late to save my SEAL career. But I'm grateful I learned it in time to save my character. Respectfully, Morrison. Elena folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her pocket. Morrison was right, he'd learned the lesson too late to remain in BUD.S. But he'd learned it early enough to build a life of integrity outside naval special warfare. That wasn't the outcome anyone would have chosen. But it was an outcome that preserved what mattered most. The sedan merged onto the highway, carrying Elena away from Naval Training Center Coronado and back to her regular duties. Her assessment mission was complete. Her report was submitted. Her impact on one class of BUD's candidates was finished. But the ripples would continue. Parker would remember that quiet competence outlasted loud arrogance. Williams would remember that challenging leaders, when necessary, was an act of loyalty, not betrayal. Rodriguez would remember that leadership didn't require dominance. And Morrison, wherever life took him next, would remember that integrity was worth more than any career. Elena pulled out the challenge coin the candidates had given her. Excellence. Observed, standards elevated. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its weight. The candidates had it backwards. Standards should be elevated regardless of observation. But she understood what they meant. Sometimes seeing excellence embodied made abstract standards concrete. Sometimes observation changed both the observer and the observed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Naval Special Warfare Command. Assessment report received and reviewed. Recommendations approved for immediate implementation. Exceptional work, Commander. Return to duty station and await next assignment. Elena typed a brief acknowledgement and put the phone away. The assessment was complete. The mission was finished. But the impact, the transformation of candidates who'd seen what excellence looked like and chosen to pursue it, that would continue long after she was gone. Some missions, Elena reflected, as the sedan carried her down the highway, measured their success not in immediate objectives achieved, but in the people they changed and the standards they elevated. By that measure, this mission had succeeded beyond anything that could be captured in a 43-page report. The training facility disappeared in the distance behind her, but the lessons taught and learned would endure. Standards elevated, excellence pursued, integrity restored. That was the mathematics of character development, and it always balanced in the end. 6 months later, Elena received an email from Senior Chief Kowalski with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to know." She opened it to find a brief update. "Commander, the BUD S-Class you assessed graduated last week. 62 candidates started the program. 28 earned their tridents. Among them, Parker, Williams, Davidson, Chen, and Rodriguez. Your assessment recommendations have been integrated into the training program. We're seeing measurable improvements in teamwork metrics, and voluntary integrity reporting has increased 340%. Morrison was not among the graduates, obviously. But I thought you'd want to know he attended the graduation ceremony as a guest. Came in civilian clothes, congratulated his former classmates, and spoke briefly with several instructors. He's working as a firefighter now. Says the lessons he learned in BUD, especially the ones about integrity, serve him well in his new career. The challenge coin your class gave you has become legendary. Every class since has asked if they'll get to meet the commander who changed everything. We tell them they need to earn that honor through their own character development. Thank you for your service to this community. The standards you elevated remain elevated. Respectfully, Senior Chief Kowalski. Elena saved the email and pulled out the challenge coin from her desk drawer. She'd carried it through 2 deployments since leaving Coronado, a reminder that excellence was not a single achievement but a continuous choice. Excellence observed, standards elevated. Maybe the candidates had it right after all. Sometimes observation did change everything. The story ends here, but the journey continues. Many new adventures are waiting for you. And if you enjoyed, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our eStory channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.